Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. And we are launching our watch party series. This will be the first documentary film, or any kind of film, to have a watch party on MINDSHOCK. So, as requested by listeners, this will be part logical analysis, part watch party. So it will not be an in-depth point-by-point logical analysis like in a logical analysis on MindShock, but it will be more of a laid-back, chill stream watch party podcast. So, I actually have not seen this before, so this will be a blind watch or first time watch for me as well. So, yeah, I'm just looking through the comments here. Justin Johnson stating, "ScrewTube loves Bruce. This should go without a hitch." Oh man, we need to have a poll. I need to put a poll up real quick on who thinks we're actually going to make it through this. So, vote in the poll here. Will YouTube shut this stream down? Welcome. Kill the bank. Use your illusions. Haley, Alien, Big Cat, Tsutsaka, our favorite Dunning-Kruger goof in the house. Jeff's wig. Globe Thrusters. Also, first time going to be watching Old World Order. Christopher Allen in here. Null Order. Sam Pedro. We got a lot of people in here. Yes, Christopher Allen. This is fair use, as we will be logically analyzing and commentating in edutainment fashion for logical veracity. I will not be stopping it every second, though. There is no logical fallacy counter. Okay, the poll here, will YouTube shut this down? 53% yes. Oh, 56. So it's edging that way. I'm not sure though. I haven't seen the content of this documentary, so I'm not really sure, but just given the general nature of anything anti-establishment, anything not peddling the mainstream narrative for the corrupt is generally messed with, shut down, or censored in some capacity. And this channel in particularly, ever since I did the top secret occult NASA patches, that stream got shut down, and ever since then, there have been quite a few glitches, shall we call them. But before that podcast, there really weren't any. I mean, some lag here and there, which I'm sure is normal. YouTube servers aren't perfect, but no major issues until that occult NASA patch podcast. So, oh wow, jumping to 59%. Oh, back to 56. Okay. Okay, so anything we gotta go over before we jump into this? I don't really know what this is about. I'm assuming it's some kind of Tartaria mud flood. I don't know how much flat earth overlap there is. We watched the teaser earlier in the week, and apparently BJ Penn is in this, which definitely piqued my interest. Most MMA aficionados are familiar with one of the pound-for-pound greats, the Hawaiian BJ Penn. Fought all the way from featherweight to heavyweight throughout his career. I am not sure any other MMA fighter has done so. Certainly not any other MMA fighter with the amount of titles that BJ Penn had, both official and unofficial. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. 58% think we will get shut down, but we will see. I mean, I'm not sure. Again, I don't know the exact content here. But let's jump right in. So this is Sean Hibbler, for those familiar with him. I haven't seen a lot of Hibbler content, I have to say. I am not that familiar with him, other than that he's a flat earther and he's on a number of podcasts. Also, call me crazy, I'm not sure I know who Stu Peters is either. He sounds really familiar. Is he on a lot of podcasts as well? You know what they should have done here, though? So, I mean, this has been translated a few different ways. History is a pack of lies agreed upon, is what I have seen stated, allegedly attributed to Napoleon. And that's what we should put here, allegedly. Because how do we know, especially if history is a pack of lies agreed upon, how do we know that this quote isn't a lie from Napoleon? How do we know Napoleon even existed?
From every corner of the earth sits glorious architecture. Magnificent structures that allegedly have no connection, yet very similar designs. This style of architecture, riddled with elegance and purpose, can be found in your neighborhood or in the middle of nowhere. And when you walk in, you are overwhelmed with a vibrant feeling of serenity, a feeling that modern-day architecture does not provide. The concept of a timeline that once existed, where structures were created with a completely different purpose. Yet, when we take a look back at who they told us built these structures, considering the timeline and the lack of technology, the story begins to crumble. And that story was taught to us all during a time when we were too young to question it. But when you shine an unbiased light upon the history books, you'll quickly uncover the lies of his story. But even before Rockefeller and his goons started the Board of Education, they already had our ancestors, and anyone who questioned their narrative would soon find themselves an unwilling resident of the original indoctrination camps. And where did they come from? Where did we all come from?
This is actually really well done. I didn't, from the teaser trailer, I didn't really get that good of an impression. I mean, it didn't really reveal the production value, but this is actually really well done. I thought it'd be more amateurish, but it's quite professional. Quite professional indeed. And for those who don't know how the American school system, aka indoctrination facility camp, started, it was actually Horace Mann imported this system from Prussia, where they specifically wanted soldiers willing to die on the front lines, and also factory workers who didn't ask questions and then just worked at the factory bell to bell to bell in a very structured fashion.
If knowledge is truly power, then maintaining such power must rely on the absence of knowledge. Are you aware that every major city in America experienced a great fire? Candle fires that turned stone to dust, leaving behind a...
No surprise the Tootsaka goof in the chat thinks a word used has something to do with production value. He thinks it has something to do with editing, or the music, or any of the composition. Oh man, I hope Tootsaka sticks around for this whole thing. We love the Dunning-Kruger stylings of Tootsaka.
Crime scene that resembles a war zone. Let's take a giant step back, perform our own investigations, question the history that was written by these victors.
I do recall that CIA document. I remember seeing that, I think even on the first or second episode of MINDSHOCK Altered History. If you haven't checked out the podcast series here on MINDSHOCK Altered History, we go through everything from Fomenko's new chronology to Mudflood, Tartaria, etc.
With a growing nationwide lack of trust for our leaders, it's time to discover the extent of the deceit and where the lie truly began.
I mean, this looks like it could easily be a History Channel documentary. I mean, the production value, I am really, really impressed here. I mean, again, the teaser trailer didn't really reveal what the production value would be. I mean, it didn't look like garbage or anything, but it didn't look like the production value was this high. I mean, this is pretty good.
What's being kept from us is huge. And you're talking earlier about the architecture. I really like to encourage people to do their research in their own communities, because you really do not have to go far to start chipping away at what they've told us and ask yourself a question: is this even possible? Is it possible that X building was built in the 1890s? And they're giving us timelines of like a year. It was built in a year. They want us to believe we didn't have the technology, that we were low tech, and yet we're building all of these amazing structures.
It's almost like it's some kind of humiliation ritual to see what kind of goofs believe that this could have been built the way the so-called powers that be, the corrupt establishments, maintain and purport. If you haven't checked out the definitive Mud Flood Tartaria Altered History podcast on MINDSHOCK, I did a long deep dive live stream a couple weeks ago on this, where we actually looked up the population of some of these small towns. And again, let's say they did have high level technology. Why would a small town of a couple hundred or a couple thousand people even need buildings this gigantic right next to their wooden shanty where they parked their horse and buggies? Yeah. Like, let's say they magically had the tech. Why would they use it for that to put next to their shanty?
This disparity between what the narrative says and what's actually there.
You have places, cities in America that look as though they were constructed in medieval Europe, when nothing was here and people showed up and just got started building, from what we're told. One would assume that they would build with the means that were available to them. Wood, nails if they were lucky. What we get is this narrative that people were showing up and really making do with what they had.
What we learn about in school is there was nothing here. This land was free for the taking. The only inhabitants were wild Indians, and we built everything here. Everything you see in this country, in North America, because we're talking about Canada too, was built by us. After we got here, nothing here. They had to change the narrative. They had to destroy the evidence. They had to come up with an explanation for who built this, why they built it, when they built it. And they had to do that for a lot of buildings.
We are told that during the 1800s, the consensus of North America was low.
I mean, look at these graphics. I mean, this is impressive stuff. I mean, this could legitimately be aired on the History Channel.
Extremely low. Too low to justify the infrastructure within the timelines they've provided. Too low to have the experience or knowledge on crafting these glorious buildings.
They're the most exquisite buildings I've ever seen, and there was only a population of a few thousand people at that time. And then I'm looking and there's mud roads and wooden sidewalks. And then I'm looking at this building that is just, it could be out of Paris or Prague. It's not computing. And so I'm realizing there again, there's a whole bunch of stories that have to be dug into, rethought, reconsidered, and in some cases completely discarded.
We no longer build like that. How does that happen in a realistic timeline? Wouldn't you be progressing year after year to have incredible buildings? Today, we would be building massive pyramids, massive courthouses that last forever. Instead, we have the complete opposite. And they're very cheap. The tools have upgraded supposedly, yet our construction has gotten worse. It's completely backwards.
There's evidence of a worldwide culture that existed in the not too distant past, and the evidence is everywhere. It's an interesting thing because, like, I've spent a lot of my life looking into ancient history and traveling around the world searching into the past, and it isn't until recently that I realised that it's actually, I don't have to travel to Egypt or anywhere. It's all right there in Sydney and in London and in San Francisco, and it's all around the world. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. All you got to do is look at the civilization you're living in with the right type of eyes, and you're sort of looking around your city and you're going, well, hang on, what's this building doing here? And why is there a building just like that in the Philippines?
What really gets me are these single-piece stone columns. 'Cause, I mean, did a horse and buggy really transport these large single pillars? I mean, I mean, just the weight. I mean, forget the. I mean, not just the weight, but the length and the bulk. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Especially in these small towns and deserts so far away from anything, and they just magically transported it there just to put up these types of extraordinary Greco-Roman type buildings right next to their wooden shanty. And the gullible coincidence theorists like Tootsaka, they just say, nothing to see here. It all checks out. Nothing strange at all. This kind of building next to a wooden shanty.
Why is there one in Japan? Apparently Japan's borders were closed, weren't they? Why are we finding what we're told is Greco-Roman style architecture in every country on earth? Was it really Greco-Roman style, or is it evidence of a culture that existed, a worldwide culture that existed right around the world in a not too distant past?
If I took a picture of this building behind me and asked any of these people, where do they think this building is in the world? I guarantee you most of them would say Rome or Europe somewhere. But no, it's right here in San Francisco. We have buildings like this all over the country. And they want us to believe that they were built in the early 1900s or the late 1800s with horse and buggy. And there's just no way that's true. These buildings were built by the prior civilization, master builders, the old world order.
This is the architecture I'm talking about. You'll find this anywhere in New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, North America, South America, all over Europe. It doesn't matter where you are. This architecture is replicated. The weird thing is, they akin it to being all built around the 1870s to 1900 mark. So all of the world just shit out of nowhere at the same time. There was nothing before it. Does it make any sense? I don't think antiquity is a long time ago. I think this civilization went just before us.
Was Martin Leitke, was he the crane operator who said it all didn't add up, or was that somebody else who was the large crane operator who operated some of the biggest, most powerful cranes in the world, and then they started questioning the official narrative based on that? I don't know, was that Leitke or not? Does anybody know? It was one of those original guys. It was Philip Druzadin and Martin Leitke and one or two other guys years and years ago. They were the first guys putting this on the interwebs. But plenty of other architects and construction workers have come out and also said the same thing. It doesn't add up.
You know, the Edwardians are supposed to be around the time of the First World War. So within grandparents' living memory, yet we know nothing about them. It's the control mechanism that covers it up with the education system. They got the news, they got the narrative, they got, you know, the mainstream to tell you how things are, but the reality is completely different. History goes to the victors. Okay, somebody invaded this place and took over a beautiful through jealousy, using trade routes, using the sea. And they took over this place. They covered all of this fine architecture with their iconography. So there's literally been a cover-up of history in more than one way.
If you look at Capitol buildings all over the earth, they look the same. They do. They've got columns, they've got domes. It was not random. And every story we're told in our historical narrative about how a place got started was some guy was the first settler there, bought some land, subdivided it, sold it, and pretty soon you have a city.
What's also strange is that there aren't new cities. You would think there'd be a whole bunch of new cities popping up, just with all the tech. And even the population and economy booms, you know, throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, post-World War II. You would think there'd be new cities popping up everywhere. Yet it's the same 30 plus thousand cities and towns that there have always been. It's weird in the US anyway. I mean, I assume that's, I mean, in other countries, are there new cities popping up all the time? I don't know. Justin Johnson in the chat saying cathode and node, the buildings were machines themselves, harnessing the ether energy and distributing it. The castles, cathedrals, or cathedrals, and churches, generators, resonators, and batteries. Yeah, I mean, there was some going on. And of course, the victors do write the history books. It's amazing how many coincidence theorists, how many of these authority worshipping, gullible goof bootlickers. I mean, I'm sure they've heard the expression the victors write the history books, and yet they put their blind faith in all the history books. It's weird. Or like the history books stamped with the approval of the corrupt establishment. Like, they can only bootlick the corrupt establishment. It's like they can't bootlick any neutral sources or alternative sources. They can only bootlick the known corrupt establishment. It's an interesting thing, but that's the way coincidence theorists operate.
But the whole narrative is based, especially in North America, that there wasn't anything there. And we built it all.
You can look at it, the whole building was a work of art. So there was obviously some pride that went behind that. It wasn't just about making money and throwing shit up as fast as you could. It was about building with a purpose, and that there was symbolism behind these things.
They built them to last. They built them with a certain level of artistry and attention to detail and customization. You see, now you'll go through a neighborhood and every home looks the same. This neighborhood, perfect example. But everything had its own identity, and it was steeped in customization and ornate attention to detail.
We don't get that now.
You don't get that now.
Even when you look at the beauty of the buildings from that Tartarian era, if people were actually paying for labour, and you had to get carpenters in there, no, you'd never build buildings like that if you're working by an hourly rate. You'd just be getting it functional. People used to build that stuff because they love to build, because beauty is actually a function. Beauty is actually a function of a creation. When you're living in a world of beauty, your soul expands, and it's expansive. You can create. You can become all that you can be. And if you can become all that you can be, you sure as hell don't need rulers. So that's why they don't want you to know about any of this sort of stuff. Now, I know we're at the pinnacle of our civilization now. This is the best it gets. The best we've ever done. Look at the quality of these walls. Hey, fuck that Gothic shit. Look at this. You know? I mean, yeah.
When I was like 8 years old, I started researching the pyramids and stuff because no one knew how they were built, you know? So I started looking into ancient history. And as I said, I'd spent most of my life traveling around the world looking at all these ancient sites, and then suddenly you see this civilization that's right there under your nose. It's been there the whole time in all of our Western cities. They covered everything up. It wasn't just inserting the Dark Ages, they changed everything. So when we start even trying to piece it together through the history that they've given us, how do we know any of these places are even the names that we're told they are? How do we know any of these things? How do we know any of the history is true? Because it's not they just put it all together and just shuffle the deck and throw it out to a bunch of countries and name them whatever they want. So it's become extraordinarily difficult to try to trace it through any mainstream history records. All we've got to really go on is the architecture itself.
I mean, just look how absolutely stunning this is. I mean, it's almost like it was built with just the intention to inspire awe. I mean, this is awe-inspiring. Unlike, you know, the boxy garbage or the shanties. I mean, that doesn't really inspire awe. I mean, but these buildings, I mean, these truly inspire awe.
It wasn't thousands of years ago. It was just hundreds of years ago. Even if you go down to South America and look at some of the temples down there, the edges on them, the beveling on them, this is only a few hundred years old. This is not old ancient structures. These are new walls. I've gone there and looked at them myself. You know, nothing is what they tell us. You know, everything is a lie. It's just how big the lie is.
Rob in the chat saying, hey, MindShock guy, I'm glad you're considering this old world stuff. Have you checked out the Altered History podcast series on MindShock? I've been going over this stuff for years, and I've actually been researching it since way back. It actually, I don't think I mentioned this. I might have mentioned this in the Tartaria Mudflood deep dive a couple weeks ago, the deep dive live stream I did. Maybe you didn't see that either, Rob. But I wanted a single definitive stream where we kind of went over absolutely everything in as concise a fashion as possible. And back, even just examining Atlantis, I first saw this theory that Atlantis was a worldwide civilization. I want to say maybe around 2008, maybe, if I'm just randomly pulling a year. Around 2008, there were theories circulating online. Ancient aliens might have possibly even touched upon it in an episode. Kind of hazy. I haven't watched Ancient Aliens. I've only seen the first couple seasons. I mean, I know they've been pretty extensive, a lot of disinfo on those as well. But they do touch upon some interesting topics as well, especially the earlier seasons. And this whole topic of a worldwide civilization, I mean, I was looking at this stuff back in the 2000s, and then as soon as Anatoly Fomenko's new chronology kind of got popular around the time of Philip Druzadin, who I forget when his YouTube channel came up. I mean, it was a number of years ago now, maybe 7, 8 years ago. And they kind of connected those dots. So that was kind of the foundation. All of this Tartaria stuff kind of makes sense if you're familiar with worldwide Atlantean civilization theories, as well as Fomenko's new chronology. Like, coming off of that, this really isn't that shocking.
Yeah, and the bigger the lie is, the easier it is for people to believe it.
There's a lot of architecture in the world today on every continent of buildings that are much, much larger than you would think people of our height would build. And so I gave the example of the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. as being one of those buildings. The Basilica, the National Shrine at Catholic.
And just to add real quick, you say you're new to the channel, as well as any other new listeners, if you haven't heard of Fomenko's new chronology, Fomenko was, I believe he was the youngest math professor, was at the University of Moscow, some university in Russia, or the Soviet Union rather. Then he got exiled for his theories, but Fomenko was this super genius who also studied astronomy and history, and he noticed that the records of astronomical events like eclipses, etc., they didn't match the written historical record. And this also connects to whether there's an I or a J, and whether or not this I or J was in front of the year. So, for example, 1300 could have been I or J 300, 300 years post-Christ as opposed to 1300. So there might be literally 1,000 years added to the timeline. So anyway, and then Fomenko also identified just these regurgitation of common stories and just the funny business and the historical narrative in general. So he was exiled. I believe he was allowed to return back to Russia and possibly did after the collapse of the Soviet Union. If you haven't checked out the AI analysis on why the Soviet Union collapsed and all of the great conspiracies regarding that, I actually have a custom AI analysis as well on the channel. You could check that out. But yeah, just a quick background on Fomenko for those not familiar with him. He's been going over this stuff for years and years and decades and decades.
University in Washington is another example. A huge, huge building.
Look at the Texas state capitol. It's incredible. You've got these pillars around the whole area. It's kind of the same thing as the Vatican.
I do wonder about Iolani Palace. How old is it? And one thing to look at is
It took them 2 years, from 1880 to 1882. How did they build that beautiful, beautiful building? Was that building here longer? Was it here before Captain Cook? There's no construction pictures and there's none of that stuff. So no power tools, horse and buggy. How is that even possible?
When you have St. John's Cathedral in New York City, that's not a style of cathedral. That's the real McCoy.
Could you imagine that being built today? I think that everybody would go crazy.
They have no legitimacy whatsoever, except to trick us and convince us that they do. And that's how they've managed to get away with this. So they could insert themselves in and set themselves up as overlords.
Stone building is not just something you can pick up and teach a convict in a matter of weeks, like we're told about Americas and Australia. Truly, that's how we're told these countries were built.
Just extremely sophisticated and technical engineering involved. And you know, there's so many questions that come to mind. How'd they do it? If they were our size, how could they even accomplish this with the technology we were told we had at the time?
You'll find many of the banks, post offices, government centers, especially 100 years ago, were facilitated in these large, glorious stone structures.
You know what else is kind of interesting? Why are these never non-government buildings? It's like all of these are government, mind control, governmentalis, the mind, mental. All of these mind control, aka government buildings, it's always government buildings that these are used for. I mean, why wasn't this either some kind of non-profit or some kind of private build? It's always the government buildings. I mean, isn't that kind of weird? Matthew shit with 3 Z's. I remember a conversation with a construction guy saying here in Austria we are not allowed to build or dig deeper than 20 meters. Why is that? I've heard similar things in the US as well, that there's a limit to how deep you can go. I don't know why that would be in terms of allowed, or is that just like typically permitted? And if you have billions of dollars, you can do it anyway? I mean, I don't know.
So, number one, the rulers wanted the stronger, more durable, more imposing structures for themselves. That sends a message to the people you're ruling over. We're going to play a little game here with 2 alternatives, right? And you or I, whoever the person deciding between these 2 is, I'd like for you to pretend you're a world leader. You're not a good one. You're evil and you'd like to rule the people underneath your thumb. Or you're looking to maintain control over people. Bear with me and envision these 2 alternatives. In the first, we have the opinion, the theory, the teachings, the paradigm that man is nothing but a carnivorous monkey in outer space, floating on a rock for no reason.
Magically manifesting, just sprouting from manifested rocks in space. Okay, hold on a second. So I'm going to give my main question here. This is my primary question, what I find probably the most fascinating regarding all of this. If anybody in the chat can come up with a plausible answer, feel free. But I don't have much. I just have questions here because, of course, this is MINDSHOCK. I do not claim anything is true or untrue, and the motto here, of course, is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. So here's my primary question. So throughout all this time period, like before the Freemasons took the Freemasonry and found the nations, foundations, and founded cities. They found the cities and founded them. So before that, Now, was 100% of the current civilization population simply orphan trained clones or whatever? Or were there random people who did walk around these abandoned cities and just continued walking? Now, this primary question cannot be asked without considering native or aboriginal populations. So, for example, even Native Americans supposedly living the same way off the land for thousands of years. So did they occasionally go through these empty cities, and what did they think about them? Was this some kind of Walking Dead situation where natives knew about these cities? Because they do have them mapped on certain Native American maps, have these cities on them. It's actually quite fascinating. And they sometimes they even draw like some of the buildings. Were they empty? I mean, and like even let's say the natives of Brazil or Australia, I mean these native populations that supposedly had nothing to do with Tartaria or Tartarian populations or Atlantean populations. So how many different groups of humans are there? And I mean this is one of my primary questions, because even today you have people living in cities using computers and advanced tech, while there are aboriginals or native populations living in the jungle with spears the same way their ancestors supposedly did for thousands of years or longer or whatever. These populations exist simultaneously in parallel. And if you fly a helicopter to the Amazon and land it and have a cell phone, a black mirror showing you a video on the other side of the world live, these native populations will think you're a sorcerer. And this is some kind of crazy magic and sorcery because they're just not used to it. So that's really my primary question. How many different groups of humans are there? So the people that eventually moved into these found nations, are these the orphan trains or clones, or, I mean, are these, whatever, Cabbage Patch grown kids populations in incubators, clones, whatever, and these are completely different populations than natives? And obviously there was some crossbreeding going on, but how many different groups of populations are there? And I mean, this is my primary question with all of this because it's so fascinating. And to this day, there are still uncontacted tribes. There's not that many left. There's only a couple left around the world, but it's tough to think about that. And I think the answer to that question could solve this riddle. Wendy Howard in the chat says maybe it has to do with our actual blood types. There's definitely something to that. There's definitely a reason why people have different blood types. We may not know the reason, but there's definitely one. And yeah, that would answer a lot of questions. Perhaps not all of them, but that could answer a lot of questions. Matthew Schmidt. True knowledge passed away with our ancestors. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of Native American shamans and some of these shamans from all over the world and native populations, they might have known the truth, which is maybe why the conquistadors and all of these conquerors wiped out native populations, because they knew the truth. Perhaps there's something to that as well.
In the middle of nowhere by accident. And this all got kicked off 43 bajillion years ago on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock p.m. And they can determine this with their color star charts and moon dust and things like that. And going on to a long, vast existence of nothing, just surviving by instinct, on par with an animal. Justification for any morals, ethics, no real pursuit of true happiness, no pursuit of harmony and understanding here on the earth. And this is all what we're living in today. There's no spiritual accountability. There's no understanding of beauty. Well, on the other alternative, On this side, we have a purposeful creation, a purposeful design to not only the human being, but the entire earth, the laws of nature. No theories, only laws ingrained into existence, woven into the fabric of reality by the designer, the creator, not in a linear sense, not, back then, this many years ago or that. It doesn't work that way. This is the fabric of what we live in. There is a value placed on beauty. Why? Because God has a beautiful creation. In order to return the favor, mankind has an impulse to create beautiful things.
I'm going to drop another mind-shocking theory here. And especially they had Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata playing there. I think the truth and history and all of the true knowledge of our past is actually encoded in the frequency of the music, of classical music. And that's why it's classical music, the classics. Just like I think classic literature has all these clues, fairy tales and folk tales, there's all these clues to the past hidden in them. Almost like they're hidden in plain sight. And yeah, so I think the resonance of the frequency of the classical music reveals the truth, but average people don't know how to process that. They don't know how to understand it, but it's there. And I don't know about other people, but when I hear certain pieces of classical music, like Beethoven especially, it's like it moves you, but you don't necessarily know to what. But again, your body's mostly water, and water responds to frequency. So if there's a way to read the frequency using your own body or physical or mental state, maybe that knowledge is lost or can somehow be revealed. But I think they might have encoded it in music as well. Because it's definitely encoded in language. And I've gone over that many, many times. Like even the Freemasons getting the Freemasonry and the found nations, the foundations of everything. I mean, it's all there. Language, even the phonetics, the phony phonetics of the Phoenicians. When you talk on the phone, being all phony. I mean, it's all there. It's all encoded in plain sight or plain hearing.
In recent times, this has been robbed from us, but nonetheless, it's in the soul of every human being to not only value beauty, to seek it out, to place a high, high emphasis on it. This is how the ancients maintained their ways of life. Geometric, proportional laws of beauty.
Anything like it in the whole world.
It's right in our own hometown. Grandpa, they'll never tear it down, will they?
Well, they better not.
Well, they didn't tear all of them down. Not that they put them up in the first place. The World's Fairs showcase many of our ancient structures in their grandest form. Yet, we are sold the story that these are alleged temporary buildings, all being built in record-breaking time for the purpose of a worldly gathering, a gathering to showcase new technology, or perhaps just taking credit for the old. With so many lights on display, one would only assume that power plants and electrical resources such as wiring and even electricians were widely available. However, during this time period, that wasn't the case at all. Therefore, how were these vast areas in the late 1800s able to light the evening sky? Like a modern-day theme park? Or was there a different method for harvesting energy? Now ask yourself, what part of these magnificent buildings look temporary? What part of these buildings look rushed? And most importantly, what part of these buildings look new?
I had another thought too, just talking about the secrets or the true knowledge hidden in classical music. What if it evokes a feeling in humans? Again, there's another word, human, Hue, as if we are some kind of light beings. Hue, man. But if there is some kind of truth hidden in the music, perhaps it evokes the feeling of the way things are supposed to be. Like there's a balance, and before the statist cults took over, the powers, the corrupt powers that be, whatever you want to call them, there was a state, whether it was the 1,000-year millennial reign, or however you want to describe it, or just the natural state of humanity, the way it's supposed to be. And the music kind of evokes that. That's why it makes you feel good or happy, as opposed to, let's say, death metal. Not that there's a problem with death metal. I have to admit, I've enjoyed a bit of death metal myself in the past. I don't listen to it anymore, but it's fun, whatever. Or rock and roll. But the classical music, it almost like it evokes a state of being that is the way it's supposed to be. And it's almost like everybody's soul is longing for it. It's some kind of bittersweet nostalgia that one can't quite place due to the collective amnesia of the human species.
Or you can just believe these guys.
With these World's Fairs, it was all brand new. This is what they tell us. It was meant to be temporary. So they used plaster of Paris and wood and all these other structures. And if you look at the pictures, that's not what you see. You see these massive masonry structures that look like what you see in Europe. They have these in places like Chicago, Omaha, Portland, Seattle, Guatemala. They have them in Tasmania.
Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio, Canada.
Each one of these fairs, each one was built in 2 years or less. Each one was magically populated by millions of people that came from all over the realm to participate in this event.
They started with the Crystal Palace exposition in 1851. So what they tell us in 9 months, from the moment they conceived of it to when it was built, it was 9 months of getting it all together in this gigantic plate glass structure with fountains and trains and all the bells and whistles. Now, supposedly, they moved that entire structure to a different location in London in 1854, and that in the 1930s, that burned down. So
I like the pause at that narrative. Like, what a narrative that is. You're just moving that building just unimaginable distances, and then it just magically burns down. Because it's so easy to move giant buildings like that.
show pictures of this Crystal Palace structure, which is massive, and all the things that are there.
I mean, who's buying that? That they just up and picked this building up and just tossed it somewhere else thousands of miles away? I mean, it's almost like they make these narratives as preposterous and silly as possible just to see what kind of goofs just believe it simply because a supposed official source said it. And, like, that's the joke on what kind of goof would believe that.
Oh, we have to move that. No problem. Oops, it burned down. Which is typically what happened to a lot of these World's Fair structures.
If you could erase it from history, people don't see it as a potential future. And I think that in itself is, for me, the moral of hiding history.
I mean, they did legitimately move like mansions, sometimes brick by brick. Nothing like those buildings, like a small mansion, maybe like an 8-bedroom home. I mean, not that small, but rich people did move. There were stories about mansions being moved brick by brick, and it took years and years and then reassembled. I mean, that might be plausible if somebody was that rich and they had that much labor to put all that on ships. And I mean, they definitely didn't do it in a year. I mean, it took years and years for them to do it. But if they really wanted to move their home from like England to the US, there are stories of that. I don't know if they're true, but it seems plausible for a smaller building if they had the money and the labor. But something like this I mean, that's kind of preposterous, especially if there's no evidence of that.
About hiding the old world. It just doesn't make logical sense to me to build something so grand and then just destroy it.
Really, those was an excuse to take existing infrastructure, build some little bullshit around it, and then when you're finished with your so-called fair, it gives you an excuse to tear everything down and nobody questions.
They might have built a couple of these buildings.
Well, even the word fair, like what is fair about the fair? Is a lady fair? My fair lady? Fair ladies? An affair? Is that fair? Having an affair? I mean, that's an interesting word, fair. And you gotta pay the fare. You gotta pay the fare to go to the fair with your fair maiden, who you might have an affair with. I mean, again, just the words and the language. To think it's all coincidental. I mean, how much of a brain dead coincidence theorist must one be to think that that's all simply coincidental? From the 1300s, this is etymology, etymonline. So fair is according with propriety, according with justice, equitable, impartial, just, free from bias. So were these world fairs simply a way to establish certain populations and power centers or different countries and states, and supposedly some kind of way to do it fairly? From 1300, it was also used as promising good fortune or auspicious, fair, promising good fortune. And of course, there are fair-haired people, people with fair hair, light hair. Then there's the fairer sex, which are women. Then there's fair game, aka legitimate targets in hunting. I mean, the word fair, I mean, we have to say here, the word fair is one of the most diverse words in the English language, without question. I mean, it's quite mind-boggling, mind-shocking, if you will. Yeah, Rob in the chat says fairy, fairy. Yeah, fairies. Oh wow, you just opened a can of worms there. Now you got the whole supernatural thing going with fairies, possibly from other realms. Wow, you really had to go there with fairy. I mean, I didn't even think of that, but yes. Wow. That, again, to think it's all coincidental. Fair also means beautiful. A fair, a stated market in a town or city. A regular meeting to buy, sell, or trade. So, were they buying, selling, or trading humans at these world fairs? The humans that were to be the populations of this particular state that the fair was being held in. A fair can also mean a religious festival or holiday. A fair is a festus. Festivus for the rest of us. A fair, festus. Festus. And also, if we're going Festus, you gotta go fetus, don't you? Feast, fetus, festus. Fair, fairy. And also fire. Fair, fire. Once you go down the fire rabbit, I mean, this really is, wow. The word fair, I mean, this really might be the linchpin here. Fair, fire, festus, fetus. I mean, wow. I mean, this is quite a diverse word. Also, the word fairing, like a ship fairing, F-A-I-R-I-N-G, to make fair, level, to make regular. So if there were airships, there were ship faring, F-A-I-R-I-N-G. I mean, this just goes on and on. There's also fair-minded, fair-spoken, fair ground, the grounds that the fairs go on. I mean, wow. I mean, we might do a whole 5-hour podcast just on the word fair. There's also the fairway, a navigational channel of a river, also used in golfing by 1898. The fairway. I mean, wow. Oh, this just, wow. I mean, I'm on Edam Online. It just gets crazier and crazier. Late 14th century, pleasing to the sight, fair, good-looking, beautiful, fair. Also, showy, pretended, plausible, specious. So fair is a synonym for specious. Appearance, form, figure, beauty, from species. Seemingly desirable, reasonable, or probable, superficially fair, just or correct. So now we have fair linked to species, of species, literally the entire human species. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, how much hidden truth is in the word fair? Huh. I mean, I'm not going to keep going through this, but I mean, there's a lot here. This definitely needs its own podcast just on the word fair. Oh, Rob in the chat with another good one. Warfare. Yeah. Fear. Oh, wow. Salt in the chat with fear. Fear, fair. Yeah. I mean, fear, fair, fire. Fire, fair. Everything seems to derive from the word fair. What? I mean, this is really the most mind-shocking thing of it all. World fairs and the word fair is literally linked to everything. Fear the fair. You fairy.
And you can actually tell the buildings that they built because they look like dog shit. Now, we have buildings that can hold 10,000 people, huge, giant buildings that look like they were made for a larger race of people, where they say they built it in 2 years, 600 acres, which is, I think, something like 27 million square feet. It's absolutely insane, the amount of architecture they say they built in 2 years.
As an architect and somebody who's been building my entire life, designing houses and building.
Also, the ferry, and you pay the fare on the ferry to get to the fair. Yeah, fair and square. What does the square refer to? Does that refer to the surface of the earth?
For 20 years or so. The time frames that they allow for just the planning, the idea that that could just be planned out in 2 years begs credulity.
They had these ornate buildings with all kind of moving sidewalks and crazy technology. They had ill things with so many lights, electricity, when electricity was supposed to be a new thing and all of that. They had shit that was like something out of a dream, bro.
Well, this is the exposition thing. We're fully electrified. You know, some of these examples, so they're electrified before electric was a thing. You know, the first electrified city was supposed to be Buffalo. First electrified building was supposed to be J.P. Morgan's in New York, all attributed to Edison. But these things, you know, some of them 1890s, fully electric, and it would have been free energy. They didn't have massive plants to generate electricity.
The first one in America was in 1876, and that was the Centennial World's Fair in Philadelphia. The one in 1901 in Buffalo was a major one. The 1904 in St. Louis was the Louisiana Purchase, and then the Lewis and Clark was in Portland the following year. If you define the word exposition, it's telling a story. It's setting the stage, the narration. So these World's Fairs were used as, this is the narrative that we want people to believe and go home with.
The World Fairs served to get people with the new program. They said, trains, incubator babies, this is the new norm. Fast forwarding people into the modern industrial age. Everyone's wearing the same beaver hats. Everyone's wearing the same three-piece suit. You know, it seemed like individuality had ceased to exist. The World's Fairs served the purpose of indoctrinating.
The World Columbian Exposition was one of the most superb. In Chicago, Illinois, formerly known as Chilaga, had some of the most beautiful stone masonry in the world. The area was nicknamed the White City, as each building was strategically painted bright white in an attempt to hide the inevitable aging of the structural entity. The mainstream narrative would lead you to believe that these megastructures were designed by the most educated and experienced architects. Right?
The architect, he didn't have any formal training.
What on earth would give you that idea?
Isn't that what the website said, right?
So your website.
Your website said that the architect of this building has no formal training.
That's
Here.
I find that implausible.
This is your website.
We all do. That's why.
I'm not sure if there were even any schools of architecture back then.
How did they know how to do this then? That's what we're asking. This is not built for dinosaurs, the Field Museum. It was built for something else. It's not to show off the fake dinosaur bones. It was for something else. When you walk inside, you can see the doors are much bigger than the size we are. It's nothing like what we build today.
The Museum of Science and Industry, which was the arts building, the fine arts building. And they make the argument that that was a temporary building like all the others, and the public liked it so much that they rallied to save it. So what they did is they went and rebuilt it out of granite and marble and copper and all the permanent materials that we see now. I think these are children's stories that they give us. I don't understand at all how serious-minded people can accept a story that says this building was built exactly as we see it now, but with temporary materials. And then because we liked it, it got rebuilt out of granite and marble and copper and glass. To me, that defies explanation and is much more of a fanciful tale.
Yeah, and why would they only like that building? I mean, the whole thing is quite spectacular. I went over that on the World Fairs episode of the Altered History series. If you haven't checked that out, you can check that out on MINDSHOCK. But yeah, I mean, why would they only like that one building? It's kind of weird.
Then the idea that that building was already there and was repurposed for a fair.
This one connects to the Shed Aquarium, I guarantee it, and it connects to a lot more buildings around this area. And it's not just here, it's in every single city in the world.
You know, we on top of water.
We're on water.
We on water. So we on top of water. You go in the basement, you will hit the water, hit the wall, and then sometimes when it rains, because the sewer be flooded sometimes, the water come in the basement, flood the whole basement.
Oh my God.
Thoughts on
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Before we leave it, press them on that. What do you got on that?
Okay, so there's massive tunnel systems throughout all of these buildings everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So you're telling us right now that there's tunnels. Basically, there's a basement here. This building is much bigger than we can see on the ground surface.
It's a basement. It's a basement here. When the war, when you go in the basement, we do rounds. What we call our rounds called the ground level, and then we got upper level. Okay. So we go downstairs to certain hallways. You will hear water hitting the walls.
Wow. You have seen the tunnel systems underneath these buildings?
According to the information gathered from my grandfather, who got here in Chicago in 1969, Well, before that, as far as for what we have here from museum we're in now, from the Field Museum to the Shedd Aquarium to Soldier Field, there are the pathways underneath that are all connected.
It's like if you go to McCormick Place, if you go, they got the little tunnels over there too, because they be flooding over there too.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's connected, you think?
Yeah. So this whole campus, the whole campus is connected. And there's tunnels. I was told there's tunnels, you know what I'm saying? It's like the tunnels along the lake that you can go down in, and then it leads you into like a little path, but you know, that's...
You know what's kind of crazy too? The coincidence theorist denial of just these extensive catacomb tunnel type systems that are under just about every city in the world. Wendy in the chat says, in my city too, old buildings mixed with new. I believe the tunnels go from continent to continent. Inner Earth series, Inner Earth cities. Our whole Earth is connected. So, yeah, if you haven't checked out the Hollow Earth podcast on MINDSHOCK, I did an extensive deep dive into Hollow Earth mythology, all of that. And there does appear to be something to it. That maybe there is some kind of Hollow Earth under the surface, miles and miles below. And it's all connected. It's very, very possible. I mean, certainly every ancient civilization seems to have mythology of such. Is it all coincidental?
I heard that from somebody that he was working for 43 years.
Really?
Been here for 43 years. He been here for 43 years. He retired, I want to say, like last week sometime.
Have you ever been in them?
No, sir. They won't allow access to the public.
Okay.
And then they only allow access to very, very few of their actual workers here.
So you think that dirt in that picture downstairs, you think the dirt is actually there and we put it there to cover up this building, to make it look like it's not as big as it really is?
That's a good one. That's good. I feel like we did though. I feel like he made the picture to fake like. I feel like the building was here already.
What do you tell your child when you're coming to a new location and they're asking you questions and you have no answers? You will start to create so that way you have a way to answer those questions, or your child will grow up with no answers and forever seeking. So
now we're here to give answers.
There you go.
When they say that these buildings were temporary, what they're basically suggesting is that it's a full-scale model. That is going to be occupied by thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that are coming in and out of these fairs, where they're going to hold together through brutal winters, through hurricanes, through potential earthquakes, with hundreds and thousands of people occupying these spaces. The liability on that alone would have shut the whole endeavor down from the beginning. It wouldn't have been permitted. It's not the kind of thing that's permissible when you're talking about the building trades, when you're talking about a public facility where you're going to be bringing so many people.
Now, this takes a huge infrastructure, and it takes a huge amount of people to do something like this. When you see these ridiculous construction photos where it's like popsicle sticks, clear manipulation.
All right, so right here you can see they just put the scaffolding up, just like they've done in the past in the original pictures of the construction. Yeah, and they're doing it right now. How hard would it be to just make it black and white and then make it look like they're doing some construction right now? NASA's not the only company to fake a photo, guys.
With a lot of these old, glorious buildings, regardless of where they are, you'll find supposed, alleged construction photos. Now, many of these will show simply scaffolding around an already constructed building. If you take an old cathedral and put scaffolding around it, and you're the first person ever to have that cathedral photographed, well, you are ripe to make a case for yourself that you may have built that to begin with, whereas you might have just been renovating that cathedral, repainting it, fixing it, old, primitive photo manipulation techniques.
Wooden sidewalks and mud roads. You have to be able to bring all the stone and brick and glass and copper and all the component parts. You have to be able to bring that to the site. And so just the roads alone, like you can scratch and sniff any aspect of this and the story starts to crumble. But if you're printing these in books, or you're presenting them like on maybe a TV documentary, let's say, and it's just an image that's going to come and go. And 99.9 right percent of people looking at them are not even going to scratch their head. They're going to just say, well, there it is. There's the construction photo, and I don't need anything else, because why would I question that? That's absurd.
Also, you'll find good old-fashioned cut and pasted, someone with an X-Acto knife out in a early primitive darkroom slapping together photos that actually don't belong together to begin with.
This technology of its day was a sure way to make multiple images and combine them into one. There was no way the rewriters wouldn't need this for faking construction pictures. And no, it's not Photoshop, but the layering process is very similar. Victorian photography manipulation, using pencil markings and scraping techniques to draw, erase, and touch up any image desired. The easiest way to achieve your goals is to have a
Also, Victorian, the name Victoria, Victor, the victors of history, the Victorian age. Who are these victors making the Victorian age?
white background that you can remove later in the darkroom. Not uncommon for others to create trick photography and show off their masking and etching skills. For back then, this was the cutting edge of the start of this fraudulent society they've built.
They take an already completed building and they whitewash the skies. They call it vanilla skies.
They'll blotch out the sky and cut away from what they want to leave in the photo. They can cut away what was there and replace it with a gray or white vanilla colored sky.
Vanilla sky, where the background is cut out and you can see the crop marks. You can zoom in and see where the edge of the building there's a little bit of a blurry edge. The sky that would have been the background has been disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, in some of these images, that is very, very obvious, the manipulation. I wonder what the coincidences think about that.
So why would they do that? If you see one construction photo that's off, where they've peaked in scaffolding, or they've taken out backgrounds, you have to stop. Why did they go to the extent to do this? You have to ask a question. And if you see hundreds of photos that are done this way, you have to realize this was an industrial scale effort to create a narrative. Exquisite masonry buildings were built in 1 or 2 years. These take time. I mean, you put 1 or 2 years just into the planning. Well, before that, you have the engineering piece. You have the design. You're not just getting a bunch of artists and builders together and knocking these things out. There's architects involved, so there's design. Then there's the engineering of it. All of this takes time. These buildings are years in the making. And especially when you're crafting every single corner of it, like what we're seeing every doorknob, every cornice over a window is celebrated. And this is why the architecture is so beautiful. It's an architecture of celebration.
You have to ask yourself this. Why is there such a lack of construction photos from the inside of the buildings? The outside's incredible, but the inside is built like a palace. There's such a lack of photos from the inside of these buildings, and they're incredible. When you had the Kleksinski building in Chicago that took 14 years, and then you come back and you look at the one before that, the Federal building, built in 7 years. How is that possible? They're not gonna be able to bring these things all the way up to the top, get these people that have no training, and actually create this amazing thing that lasts forever. In a timeline where they tell you they were riding around on horses and wagons, where this should not be accepted.
I also kind of just thought of another theory. So this could go into the category of McGuire theories when it comes to all this stuff. Because he said the word timeline, and it got me thinking. What if there are literally different timelines, different dimensions, and the horse and buggy people somehow the timelines either merged or glitched, or possibly there was some kind of intentional technology to merge or jump or traverse time dimension timelines. And people that didn't belong in this timeline or dimension got here. And those are the horse and buggy people. So if there isn't just one timeline or dimension, does this make sense? Because if there are multiple ones and they intersected, or there was some kind of glitch, or maybe it's related to the Large Hadron Collider or something like that, where CERN, something similar to that in the past, glitched or merged timelines or dimensions. Does that make sense?
It's just not going to happen in the amount of time that they're telling us.
We know people cook the books in other areas. We know people have manipulated photos for the sake of deceiving people, just like NASA does. This isn't a new thing. It's an old thing, but it's still being done today. You find photo manipulation. Now, CGI, the techniques have developed substantially. But back then, they thought they were at the cutting edge. They didn't think that they would be caught on to.
Or maybe they didn't care. Like, by the time they figure this shit out, who cares? We'll be long gone, and who cares?
They have their stories. Everything has something to explain it within the last 100 to 200 years.
I even called the Illinois State Archives building, and they didn't have information on their own courthouse that's located within 1 mile of itself.
Illinois State Archives, how may I help you?
Hey, I was just transferred to you because I was looking at the Supreme Court when it was built, and I was just trying to find like records on it, and it said it was saying like on their website it was saying that it was built in like a year. So I was just trying to figure out if that was true or not.
I would have you tried contacting the Supreme Court?
Yeah, and they sent me over to you guys.
Okay. I don't know what we would have on the building itself. Let me look here.
Yeah, it was saying on their website that the keys were given over on February 4th, 1908, but 1908 they also said that they were moving out of the old state capitol building, so I don't know, 2 months, it doesn't sound right.
Yeah, that sounds kind of odd. Let's see here. I don't know if we have anything on the building itself.
So the entire Illinois State Archive doesn't have any information on the Supreme Court. Does anybody else find this funny? So there are just magically no records on any of these buildings? Does anybody find that weird?
No.
The stories that we've been told are basically just that. They're stories that we're repeating over and over, and we're just regurgitating what they've been telling us. You could either choose.
I mean, and for the coincidence theorists who don't find that strange, I mean, I actually still have the blueprints of a home from, I don't even know how old it was, but some old blueprint. I mean, people have blueprints to old family homes, even if they were just rudimentary sketches, but they have those for just a random small home. And yet they don't have any records for some of the biggest, most expensive buildings at the time that were built. I mean, this is kind of hilarious. I mean, is this like losing the telemetry data for the moon landings? I mean, as I mentioned, there were like I knew a bird watcher who had all of his data from bird watching on those old magnetic computer tapes. He had every single one on something as inconsequential as his own personal hobby of bird watching. And yet, with billions and trillions of dollars, they can't keep the telemetry data from allegedly the greatest accomplishment in the history of mankind, when even bird watchers can keep a record of their death. I mean, it's just so comical.
Choose to believe it, or you could choose to research and see the truth, that these are buildings from the past civilization.
I'm standing in front of the sunken ship parking garage, which is in the exact spot as the Occidental building. Now, the Occidental building was built supposedly in 1882 and was destroyed in the Great Fire. That was a giant masonry, massive 3-4 thick wall of just solid brick and stone that was somehow burned down in a fire. So this is what the modern era rolled out for us. We have the sunken ship parking garage, which is just kind of a thumb in the nose of this world that we're living in now. Yeah, salt in the wound, but I think it's just good that we remember the past and know what used to be there and the glory of the old world as it was.
On a lot of these old glorious structures, you'll start seeing old cheap banners, signs just kind of get slapped.
I'm going to throw in another McGuire here. I actually did a podcast episode on the Old World Order. I think I even called it the Old World Order in the Altered History series. Let me double check which episode that was. It was Altered History Episode 6, Old World Order and World Fairs. I did this one 4 years ago, so quite a while ago. This is 4 years ago I did that episode. And I went over the theory that the Old World Order was similar to the New World Order in that it was all about controlling the masses, and that the Old World Order were not the good guys. It was simply the power structure before the last reset. And so maybe these buildings are not by some kind of benevolent beings, but it was just a previous system of control. Now, maybe it was a lot better than this one, but that doesn't mean it was good per se. Because these still might have been rulers and controllers of some kind, and I think that's important to keep in mind.
To these old, glorious stone buildings. They simply don't fit together.
These buildings were not intended to become money-driven establishments, and those they kept turned into such. It's funny that we never hear through the passing down of generations stories regarding any of the difficulties a nation would face building a magnitude of stone and brick palaces.
Why are none of our grandparents or great-grandparents ever speaking highly of these buildings? If they were truly built in the early 1900s, do you think one of our grandparents would have been like, yeah, I was at the site and I'm so proud of building that? Or my friend, I knew somebody and he was over there building that building? Not one time. Does that sound odd? In order to build some of these buildings in a year, you'd have to have hundreds of people.
That's actually a really great point, because I do remember friends talking about how their family member worked on the construction of a stadium or something, like a big extraordinary construction project. There were always friends of friends or friends of family members. There were some degrees of separation of someone who literally worked on the project, or at least was across the street watching it being built. But that is a good point, where that doesn't seem to exist with any of this. I mean, is it even mentioned in any of these journals from like hundreds? Because people used to have their private journals, just like they do now. And is it ever is the construction of any of these buildings ever mentioned in any journal of any of the thousands of people living in any of these towns or cities?
Daily, sleeping there. You'd have to have people with houses located on site because they got their horse and their wagon. Are they traveling home at night? Where are these horses staying during the day when they're building these buildings? And it just, the story doesn't add up. If it was really true.
Wow, major mind-shocking comment here from Heracles. I think we are a lot closer to the Great Flood than we are told. And these buildings might be the Babylonian buildings. That's curious. That's curious, Heracles. I didn't put that together, but that's very, very interesting. Because was the Great Flood the last mud flood reset? Was Noah's, or, I mean, were there multiple great floods and multiple resets? And if this was Babylon, does that explain why it was all destroyed, so to speak? Or was this another civilization post-Babylon that suffered the same fate? If history repeats and there are many, many cycles, was Tartaria simply another Babylon?
Truly built, like they say, then there would be so much proof. And sorry, but saying that a photo wasn't available or hard to take back then, that's not gonna cut it. You've taken a photo before, why couldn't you take another one? They transported all these materials from hundreds of miles away, and it got there perfectly. There was never an issue. It just isn't logically possible.
As an architect of 20 years, I have a pretty good understanding of how materials react to the elements over time. The modern infrastructure of Seattle is at best 140 years old. There's no room in that narrative for a building to be showing the type of weathering that we're seeing beyond. So just to me, that one building alone is further evidence that this city was here for a long time. To me, it's been there for centuries. I would give this building 300 years. I like to look at a building as telling its own story.
I mean, this opens up a can of worms, too, because if buildings remained from previous civilizations and previous resets, like let's say these buildings were Atlantean, so if Babylon was a worldwide civilization as well, were there also Atlantean buildings around during the Babylonians? And then after the destruction of the Babylonians, were there both Atlantean and Babylonian buildings? And then if Tartaria was after that, were there still Atlantean and Babylonian buildings remaining during the reign of the Tartarians? And now in our modern times, there's a combination of all these types of buildings. Let's not fall for false dichotomy logical fallacies.
I'd like to say that stones don't lie. Stones are always going to tell you the truth. And if you look at it through that lens and you let it tell its own story, then something else emerges entirely.
There are blocks, stones used in some of the constructions of places like Machu Picchu, even St. Augustine, Florida, just sitting there, a hewn stone that no amount of men could have dragged. It would have taken something larger, something more technologically assisted. That is, of course, unless we're talking about people of substantial size.
In many ancient books all over the world, they speak of giants that existed and alongside what we would call regular-sized people now.
People who were larger might have had an easier time hauling, hewing, placing, arranging stones of this size that we see in the megaliths of the Americas, that we see in the megaliths of the whole world, may have been the result of giants.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm sold on the giants building everything narrative. Maybe some things in some areas, yes, particularly the so-called ancient civilization sites. But in terms of some of these modern, or more modern, possibly Tartarian buildings, I don't know, maybe they just used levitation, sound frequencies to manipulate matter and all of these things. Advanced tech of some kind. I'm not sure that it was simply just giants building stuff. I know that's a popular theory, but I'm not, if they had this other tech, antiquitech or otherwise, it just seems like they would use that. And were there really that many giants? I mean, I don't know. Yes, something else is here. They could have had some secret tech like what is said to have been used to build Coral Castle. Yes. I mean, that's kind of where I'm leaning, just because I think in the more distant past, maybe giants were used to build things, possibly also with other tech as well. Let's not fall for false dichotomies, of course.
If you're using critical thinking, it just doesn't make any sense as to why build at such a large scale for people our size.
That's the weirdest part, is when you have doorways in random buildings that are too big. They're 20 feet high. Why?
Yes, use your illusions. I'm with you. I think the larger size is to help accommodate giants, but not built by them specifically. Yeah, I'd be leaning in that direction as well.
Why would you build a door frame that's 20 feet high for a population that is so small?
Why would a regular sized human
Or even if giants did build those buildings, they didn't necessarily use they still used the advanced tech to do so.
not just why, but how would a regular sized human make something so massive? It just boggles the mind.
Why do 6-foot men and 5-foot women need that?
We don't do that. We build door frames that are proportionate to our size.
They're just absolutely huge.
Right, this makes sense.
No sense whatsoever. Church is exactly the same. They have just massive doors, and just like you go through a little door here to get in there. I noticed when I was in Europe last, they had some doors I took photographs of, and the lock on the door was up here. Yeah, for taller people.
You have these door frames that are in stone. You can't take them away. And they're 20 feet in the air or taller. And then you have our door frame that we build inside of the door frame so that we fit through normally. We're much shorter than they were as a civilization.
Think about it. You'd have to be a fucking moron to build a door that's 30 or 40 feet high if you're 6 foot tall, and you can't even reach the doorknob.
Across this plain, we find much evidence, abounding evidence of giants, not only in the major city centers of this world, but in the burial mounds and ancient ruins of the old world. And what you find around the major city centers is giant doorways.
Yeah, that's absolutely massive. I mean, that is a massive door. Also, the word giant. Ants are tiny. Giants. Antarctica. Andes Mountains. The land of giants. I did an early podcast on giants. It was actually one of the first podcasts on MINDSHOCK years ago, where we went over some of this stuff, but not all of it.
We had giant books. We had giant helmets. We had giant knives, giant samurai swords, giant rifles.
Yes, Rob. Antiquity. That's a good one. Antiquity. Yeah, and even anti anything, the opposite of. Giant, the opposite of a tiny ant, is a giant. Anti-ant is giant.
We had giant shoes.
Gigantic. Antic, the antics of ants.
We had giant crowns. We had giant typewriters, giant bells.
Giant this and that, things that don't seem suited.
Antiquity, anti-quiet, antiquity, not quiet, not quite, antiquity, quiety, quiet, quite quiet. Antenna, yes, connected to electricity, yeah. Interesting. Current. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, Joyce, that did remind me. If you haven't checked out the Reptilian podcast, where some people suppose that the bells would reveal reptilian shapeshifters due to the frequency of the giant bells, and they were all destroyed.
For the average sized person, even on the taller side, it just doesn't make sense. And to think that large communities of people got together and built structures that were excessive, costly to begin with, but then you're adding the factor that they're building for a greater size than they need. It's not very cost efficient. It's not in line with what we're told about frontier America.
So even just compared to me, right, in terms of a hip placement, my knee is up here and I'm 5'11". So these are really large individuals. Really large individuals.
And then when you think about it, it's not even that big of a deal, really. Like, what's the big deal? There was giant people.
I mean, I've seen some of the unearthings of skeletons of giants and all this type of shit. Like, and what's so funny is, you know, people will dismiss giants even though there's a myriad of evidence to, it, at the very least, suggest that they existed, right? But there's nothing that would even suggest that dinosaurs fucking existed. And y'all motherfuckers believe in them, okay? If you were to find giant bones like that. Oh, give me that. That's yeah. That's the femur of a velociraptor. Get the fuck out of here. This is bullshit.
The Smithsonian Institute has the bones. They found this at Cahokia. And there are articles saying that they took these bones from St. Louis area and put them in the Smithsonian Institute. They're not telling us that they have them, when really we know they're either in the basement or they destroyed them or threw them away. There's so many news articles from the 1800s and the early 1900s of them destroying or disposing of these bones into the ocean.
They had to cover it up. There's no room for giants in their new world, and they have to lie to us about it. They had to write the storybooks telling us that we came from monkeys.
I think everything was bigger. I think everything was much bigger. I think there was more oxygen in the air. The trees were much bigger. The places were much bigger. They were better. They had all the technology. These people may have left or may have been killed off. My opinion is that they went for more land. I don't think they're allowed to be here. I think this is all an operation to repopulate this place and to be controlled by the leaders, so-called leaders.
Okay, I'm going to stop this right here. We'll finish this up in part 2 tomorrow night, hopefully. But I just want to give this final thought here. Is it possible that this realm is meant as kind of either level 1, or who knows, maybe this is level 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 20, and then there's the next level where civilization cycles. Once you reach a certain civilization level, you have to go to the next outer circle, possibly. If Antarctica is some kind of circle that encircles this whole realm, perhaps these beings, once they achieved a certain status in this realm, whoever controls all the realms, now they're no longer allowed to be here for whatever reason. They achieved a certain civilization status, and now they have to move to the next realm in the outer lands of Antarctica or whatever. And perhaps our current civilization, when it achieves a certain level, then we would have to do the same, and then there would be a new civilization group that would come and inherit all of our technology and all of the technology that came from before in this realm, in this particular realm. And then once they reach a certain level, then they migrate to the outer lands as well. And this is just the natural cycle of things. Perhaps either related to blood type or not, maybe Native American populations or Aborigines or whoever, maybe they're exempt for whatever reason from these cycles. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's definitely weird, but this last point made in the documentary here regarding them having to leave after achieving a certain status, I do wonder if that's just the natural state of the realm here. But hope everybody enjoyed the first watch party on MindShock, and we'll be finishing this up tomorrow with plenty more discussions. So thanks again for joining us. If you want to help support the MindShock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. And you could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time. Welcome to MindShock. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and this is our part 2 of the watch party of Old World Order, Hibbler's pretty high-end documentary on faked and manipulated history and what could be one of the most vast and far-reaching conspiracies of all time. That including, Tartaria, mud flood, whatever you want to call it, just the faking of history, the missing pieces of the real history. What are they? I mean, that's what we're all here for. And in this watch party, part 2 of the inaugural MindShock watch parties, it's not a point-by-point logical analysis. It's simply watching this, giving some musings on it, hearing what people in the chat have to say, and logically analyzing some points here and there. But the style here is, of course, watch party style. Welcome back to all the usual suspects up in here. Dave Begotka saying, party not like Manitowoc County party, I hope. Wow. If you haven't checked out the MindShock series on Stephen Avery, make sure to check that out. I'm going to try to have Dave on, actually, for an episode. We've been kind of trying to schedule that for a bit. Got plenty more guests coming as well. So let's pick up right where we left off here. And of course, if you do enjoy the Mind Shock podcast, find it interesting and informative, and want to help logic and reason return to a world where it's quickly going extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. Or if you are with us here live in the live chat.
Called the Illinois State Archives building. Thing during the day when they're building these buildings, and it's just this. The places were much bigger. They were better. They had all the technology. These people may have left or may have been killed off. My opinion is that they went for more land. I don't think they're allowed to be here. I think this is all an operation to repopulate this place and to be controlled by the leaders, so-called leaders.
If you go back to the biblical scriptures, when the Nephilim came about from the fallen angels breeding with the daughters of men,
Boggin in the chat saying the Aboriginals of Australia think this is the dream, and when we sleep, we experience reality. Yeah, I've heard that before. So there's actually a nursery rhyme that has just been embedded in my brain. I mean, it definitely mind shook me as a small child. And it's time for a nursery rhyme right now. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Now, this is I didn't want to really get into some of these nursery rhymes, but I think we have to. I think there's a lot of hidden truth in some of these old nursery rhymes, and that's why they were made nursery rhymes, so they would be embedded forever in all of the cultures, so the truth would somehow be there, even if people didn't fully grasp it. There's another haunting one, which is ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And that one is haunting for a whole bunch of other different reasons. But in terms of rowing your boat gently down the stream, so I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit holes of etymology, but everything seems to have to do with water and navigating the water. Water's above, water's below, whatever. You're born, you have a birth. What is a birth in naval terms? Coming into existence, the origin or the beginning, such as where a boat departs from. Now, what else do you use in life? Currents, the currents of the ocean, currency, electric currents, and also currency, like money, used to navigate the world. So you have all of these references to maritime terms, so to speak. I mean, it's definitely weird. It's definitely weird. We're not going to go, I mean, we could spend hours on this. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole for the purpose of this watch party. But in terms of dreaming, if you, when you're awake, is that the real dream? And then, of course, the Aborigines, they also have dream time, the dream time. And just real quick from the wiki, the dreaming, also referred to as dream time, is a term devised by early anthropologists to refer to a religio-cultural worldview attributed to Australian Aboriginal beliefs. The dreaming is used to represent Aboriginal concepts of every when, during which the land was inhabited by ancestral figures, often of heroic proportions or with supernatural abilities. These figures were often distinct from gods, as they did not control the material world and were not worshipped but only revered. The concept of the dream time has subsequently become widely adopted beyond its original Australian context and is now part of pop culture. Translations and meaning: every when, world dawn, ancestral past, ancestral present, ancestral now, unfixed in time, abiding events, or abiding law. The concept of the dreaming is inadequately explained by English terms and difficult to explain in terms of non-Aboriginal cultures. It has been described as an all-embracing concept that provides rules for living, a moral code, as well as rules for interacting with the natural environment. It provides for a total integrated way of life, a lived daily reality. It embraces past, present, and future. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's difficult to directly translate anything from so many different languages, including languages that don't have words that match other languages. Okay, so let's continue here.
For giants, it's in black and white, it tells you.
Yeah.
There's plenty of evidence physically we had a race of giants. We are not that race. We are a different race.
Yeah.
We are a different set of people.
I think we're cohabiting. I think they really at the same time.
Most of them play basketball.
Yeah, man. Well, that's it. They're in the Harlem Globetrotters undercover, aren't they?
Talk of the Nephilim going into, having sex with regular people and creating some sort of mutants and all of this type of shit.
Training Shaq's grandpa. Yeah.
You're right.
Big ass tall. Yao Ming's grandpa.
We see a lot of tall people in the NBA and all of that. Is this a remnant in the DNA?
It's a fact that there were giants. It's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, we have proof of this. What makes more sense? You have a civilization that's short and tiny and riding around on donkeys, or you've got a tall, very strong population that's smart and capable and have experience that are building these cathedrals and basilicas. The places that are built are massive. It's proportionate to their size.
You find skeleton after skeleton exhumed from the mounds of America, from the mounds of Florida, South America. Go over to Mesopotamia and you'll find the same thing. Giant people buried under the ground. And these were whole races. These were not, one guy who gets gigantism by accident.
There's still giant skeletons, giant skulls that are being uncovered randomly, and the push is really to completely discount that and say, nope, not true. But the 19th century is full of the findings of giant bones. Didn't happen a long time ago. This happened recently.
Human history is framed as to convince the average Joe that all of the luxuries, the benefits, the technological advances in their life, all of those things are the mere fruits of the industrial age and an industrial way of life, and the banking systems that followed, the methods of travel that became cemented after the industrial age.
In the 1800s, all of the world's inventions just shit out of nowhere. Okay, so you got like literally everything from the Underground Railway to the railways, the transport system, modern shipping, the modern trades, banking, the whole thing, everything just arrives, around maybe the 1850 mark. When records started, coincidentally, because all of our birth records were never official until 1850. Before then, they were in church parishes and they were highly controlled, as is the information in the church. So nobody can really look that far back into, into the past to find out their ancestry.
And that's a really good point too here by Lightkey here, because a lot of authority worshipping cultist goofs, they hallucinate that everything can be known going back so many generations through birth paperwork or whatever. But when you're talking about, again, this is something coincidence theorists have a really hard time with. Humans are fallible and or corrupt. It's not rocket science, but these poor goofs, the mental capacity or the mental strength, it's just not there to grasp that there could be some fallibility or corruption. Because even if there's no intentional corruption, humans are fallible. Records aren't perfect. Even this is kind of a mind shocker for most people. It's estimated that somewhere around anywhere from 0.1 to 3% of people might not be the biological children of the parents that they think they are the biological children of due to mistakes at hospitals. Babies getting switched, labels getting switched. So even if on the low end, even if you go 0.1% or whatever, or even if it's 0.01, but the points I saw were actually 0.1 to 3%, because obviously, there's third world countries where, even in first world countries, mistakes are made. It's not rocket science. Humans make mistakes. It's kind of crazy how this even needs to be explained. But some babies get switched, and the parents don't know. Because how many people actually get a legit DNA test? A paternal or maternal DNA test at any point in their life, particularly if they're part of a supposed happy family. Like, what's the need to do so? But the ones that do, they just extrapolated the data to show statistically it's anywhere between 0.1 and as high as 3%. But even if you take 0.01 of the entire population of the world, you're still talking countless. So many people who think they're they're legitimately the children of their parents biologically when they're not, due to hospital mix-ups. So why would all these authority-worshipping cultist bootlicker goofs hallucinate that all of these records of family histories going back generations and generations and generations are accurate? It's a weird hallucination.
We are convinced that to be human today is a result of ingenuity in the industrial age. This is not true.
Another element of history they've conveniently helped you forget about. A luxurious form of travel that was promptly removed from our skies.
Airships are the oldest form of air travel. They're the most time-tested. Now, they've been taken out of circulation. A lot of people have the false misconception that if you were traveling on an airship, you would be confined to the little cabins that were suspended from the bottom. You know, like the pilot's cockpit. You'd probably feel a little iffy about those coming down, being on the bottom of the ship. It's coming down, you look like you're gonna get smushed. Well, that big blimp is not just a balloon. In many, many airships of the old world, you had access into that large cavity of the blimp. And there were restaurants, there were bars, there were dance halls, things like this. This is all a matter of fact.
Why would they build such a big thing and not put anything inside? So it's basically like a cruise, but a comfortable cruise where, you know, you're not sitting in the bottom part of the airship where they normally show you on a blimp. You're sitting in the airship.
And we actually went over this on the comprehensive, definitive Mudflood Tartaria covered up history podcast stream on MINDSHOCK, where we went into these airships. Very interesting stuff, to say the least. Very, very interesting stuff. Was the entire Hindenburg disaster all set up to put the kibosh on airship travel? But I mean, look at the luxury here. I mean, even if it travels a lot slower than a 747 or 757, I mean, the luxury alone here. Some of these places had theaters, movie theaters. I mean, they had entire like boardwalk circles where you could walk around. Full restaurants. I mean, that's awesome. Not to mention the storage space. I mean, it just seems like a truly superior way to travel, and with improved technology, they can get them traveling a lot faster as well.
It's a beautiful place.
A beautiful, easy, graceful method of travel, flush down the drains. They're actually safer than airplanes. And what we had was a mass media event in the form of the Hindenburg, which actually scared most of the world's population away from ever getting in an airship again.
It's starting to rain again. The rain had slacked up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It's burst under flash. Get it started. It's right, and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring pads, and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the fans are just screaming around it. I can't talk to people and friends around there.
Now, for the coincidence theorists who hallucinate that false dichotomies have to be necessary, they don't understand false dichotomy logical fallacies, that doesn't mean the announcers were in on it. I mean, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, maybe they're not that great actors. But if you were the Illuminati string pullers, so to speak, would you really trust actors? Or would you set up a controlled event where you didn't let people know so their reactions would truly be genuine? You don't have to worry about them slipping up. You don't have to worry about bad performances. You don't have to worry of them becoming whistleblowers later on since they don't know anything. I mean, again, coincidence theorists, they just can't grasp the absolute basics of logic or how any conspiracy would actually be carried out. And obviously, they don't learn from any of the proven conspiracy theories.
Oh, I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. Honestly, just laying down massive smoking wreckage. And everybody can't hardly breathe and talk and screaming. Lady, I'm sorry. I can hardly breathe. I'm going to step inside while I cannot see it. Johnny, that's terrible. Listen, folks, I'm going to have to stop for a minute because I've lost the voice. This is the worst thing I've ever witnessed.
Oh no, can't do this. They're dangerous. With the footage of the flaming Hindenburg, falling out of the sky.
People in the chat asking what was filming the flying blimps. I'm assuming camera from another blimp? Or a plane, right? I mean, they had planes at the time as well. Planes or other blimps. I mean, when somebody's filming a helicopter these days from the sky, or let's say before drones were popularized, if there's footage of a helicopter or a plane, I mean, it's taken from another helicopter or another plane.
Nope, no more airships. But there's a lot of evidence, shall we say, that's available to show that, yes, there were airships and they were a pre-existing technology. And one of the ways that they get rid of things is to say, like, it's unsafe, safety hazard, we can't do this anymore.
And I don't want to be flying in that again because there's just fire up in the air and there's no way I would ever travel in that again. So I'd rather pick to be in an airplane.
Let's stick with our helicopters and our airplanes, and we're gonna can airships.
What's a more tranquil form of travel? Airship or airplane? You can't tell me that everyone isn't terrified getting up on that tarmac and...
You know, the other thing that's kind of weird. Has anybody else thought about this? Like, there's either private jets or sardine-packed airliners. Like, yeah, they have first class or business class, but why is there no other middle ground? Why isn't there, like, a large 757 or 787 that actually has reasonably spaced seating? I mean, it's just... I guess it all comes down to money, but still, you could charge slightly more for the seats without outrageous first-class prices. Or like a new airline company to come in as a competitor. Kind of like with Uber, you have like Uber XL or some of these things that could compete with like these crappy taxi cabs. Like you have luxury type vehicles, and like an Uber XL would still be cheaper than, let's say, a town car service in most cases. I haven't looked at the latest prices, but when they were first coming out, like a town, you have like limos, this super luxury, and then you have crappy taxis. Like, why is there nothing in the middle until Uber or Uber XL, whatever? Or Uber Black, like whatever. Why is there no such option for airliners? I mean, it seemed like airships were that was a good option.
Taking off on an airplane.
On an airplane, you're stuck. You've got 60 to 100 people stuck on this little plane. You can't travel that far with the tanks that they have. With an airship, you can travel very far, and you can travel with a lot of people. You could take mass amounts of people to these other lands that are much further than we could ever imagine.
The airships of Germany were touching down in Opelika, Florida for years. And Glenn Curtis, the man who opened up that Opelika airport, is a man embroiled in scandal. So if anyone's telling lies here, it's those guys.
Glenn Curtis was nicknamed fastest man alive for breaking top speed records on a motorcycle using gas engines. And he helped push gas as superior to steam and other techniques. He started slapping gas engines on airships too, and he helped get them off of other methods. Then he did the same thing with airplanes in direct competition with the Wright brothers. He tried to steal the Wright brothers' patents with the help of the Smithsonian.
Towards the end, they started filling them with dirtier gas, trying to get them to be gas propelled. That was not the case. Many of these were steam. In some instances, just like a submarine. They can try and hide this from us a little bit, but you, the viewer, can go and look this up for yourself. The blimps were a lot more sophisticated than we're told. And going back to the comparison between airplane and blimp, they can literally and metaphorically bottleneck the costs of travel by only allowing so many people onto this tiny little tube that's traveling so fast, so dangerous. We'll let this go by.
Speaking of modern day airports,
You can
Also, let's keep in mind all of the old stories, call it mythology or whatever, going back, and there's always stories about airships, ships in the sky. I mean, literally, airship, a ship. I mean, ships are usually in the ocean, but there are airships. It seems like every culture all over the world, and all of their older stories, there are always airships. Not necessarily traveled, with gods or any supernatural beings, just simply airships. I mean, there's paintings going back however long that have airships. There's stories of ships, literally like wooden. They look exactly like the ships in the ocean, but they're flying in the sky. So does that mean they weren't direct first-hand accounts? Because the people writing the story didn't know? They didn't have a description? But in any case, is it possible airship travel is far older than anybody thinks? And maybe was even around not just before the last reset, but the previous reset, the reset before that, the reset before that. I mean, if there's nothing new under the sun, then perhaps every civilization cycle and every reset cycle has also developed an airship, and some more advanced than others, like the Vimana of ancient India.
only fit maybe a couple hundred onto an airplane when you could fit a couple thousand onto an airship. Number one, it's graceful, but number two, you can fit way more people. You can have way more facilities on that. It's like almost like a traveling city. So the airships provided something that airplanes don't. They were safer in terms of the speed of travel, the danger of landing somewhere you're not supposed to.
To think, if your fear of flying is caused by open waters, in the case of an emergency, you would now have a way to safely dock on a boat. And a fear of landing could be comforted by a slow docking airship.
Things like the Eiffel Tower, which we were told was built for a World's Fair, but there's Eiffel Towers everywhere.
Well, not only that, but for water-based landings, couldn't they relatively inexpensively have possibly some kind of inflatable raft under the entire airship? Or multiple inflatable rafts, like of a very large size, where in case of emergency, they could just inflate those and it would just be literally a floating regular ship.
This will give you an opportunity for a balloon to come in to your city and mull around, and you get straight out, and it delivers you to the place where you want to be. Now, don't think this is beyond the bounds of possibility. They actually did it. Hindenburg used to couple up to the top of the Empire State Building. The doorway would come out, gantry would come out, and everyone would climb out of the Zeppelin into the Empire State Building. And they've done it in LA, in Chicago. These balloons were the transport of the day.
Believe it or not, it was not uncommon for people to fly their airships straight into downtown New York City and to dock those airships in the steeples, in the finials, the towers, the spires of places like New York City, Chicago, major cities in Germany, England, you name it.
You know what else is really interesting? All of these tall buildings depicted in art going back however many hundreds or thousands of years is the whole purpose of a skyscraper for airship docking. Because not only are we talking about these ornate stone buildings in Greco-Roman style in these small towns with no populations, if these were made by a previous civilization during a previous reset, some of the super tall buildings, was that the whole reason for it? To be able to travel via airship across large continents from whatever, beyond the lands of Antarctica, if there are lands beyond. So all of these tall buildings and towers, even castle towers, these just gigantic castle towers all over the world, with castles and towers towering over everything. That would see, because if it's not for airship travel, I mean, I guess you could say maybe they would want to justify the cost, and the labor could be justified just because they look magnificent and they're tall, maybe. But wouldn't it be far more practical if the investment into all of these tall towers, from castles to Tartarian buildings, if it was all for the reason of airship docking? All of a sudden, that kind of sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
Airships were docking. They would offload people into the tippy tops of buildings.
I think that there was more than just airships. I think that the technology goes further than that. I think that these things were much more powerful, and I think that they went further than we can ever imagine, to lands that we're not told about.
Behind the scenes, they are still making these, but we wouldn't have access for making our own.
If you wanted to build an airship today, you can't, because NASA owns 99% of the helium. The tech back then was possibly even more than what we have now. There's videos in the 1930s, 1940s of hoverboards and portable scooters that ran off of electricity. They used to have self-parking cars.
Right when photography was invented, you have these electric trolleys running wireless around cities. 20 years later, they'd all be breaking down, then went on to wires, then went on to the slower Edison electric grid.
That's actually kind of hilarious. Like, this vid, this just highlighted the de-evolution of travel, didn't it? I mean, this is kind of weird. This is kind of weird.
Remember that they have much, much more than what they're giving us. They are slowly giving us back the technology that was once here, that they found from the previous civilization.
It's funny, right? Because they drop it back in doses, pretend like they're the heroes to reintroduce it. But meanwhile, that very thing that was designed to create freedom and creativity within humanity is now spun to be used for manipulation and control.
Who's the guy that was just on screen? Does anybody know? That was a very eloquent way of putting it. That was a very impressive, succinct theory demonstrated. Does anybody know who this guy was that was just on screen a second ago? Does anybody know who this is? He's extremely well spoken. I know that was only a couple seconds, but I was pretty impressed with that. Anybody in the chat know who this is? He's not dressed impressively, but he's very well spoken. Well, hopefully somebody watching this on a playback will drop the name in the comments, because I'd be interested in seeing more of his takes, because, I mean, I'm not often impressed, but that was definitely an impressive take right there.
Pretend like they're the heroes to reintroduce it. But meanwhile, that very thing that was designed to create freedom and creativity within humanity is now spun to be used for manipulation and control. But it's dropped in those doses where we just accept it, and the line gets pushed further and further and further, and people just sit back and they're just like, this is life.
Wireless energy.
Wait, does anybody know what this is from? This is
Dropped in
crazy
those
right here,
doses.
this little video. This has to be
accept
from a movie or something,
Pushed
right?
further and further.
Not the UFO,
and
I've
further.
seen this before.
People just
The
sit
flying humanoid
just like,
coming
this
up.
is life.
This right here. This has to be from a movie. Is that some kind of jetpack? I mean, this has to be from a movie, doesn't it? Now, I've seen this one here. This one, I don't know, maybe that's legit. But the one right before It
Those
looks
doses where we
really
just accept
crazy.
it, and the line gets pushed further and further and further, and people just sit back and they're just like, this is life.
This one right here. This one right here. I mean, this is pretty incredible. This is a flight test. Anybody got the guy's name? Is there any more context? I've never seen this particular clip right here before. Steve. Oh wait, the other guy that was talking is Steve Kasten. He's a fighter? Wow. Yeah, I just went on Tapology. Steve Kasten is a fighter. Oh, he only has one fight. A grappling, he has one loss. Emerald City Invitational, November 5th, 2022, in grappling. Unless he has other fights. I mean, wow. I mean, that is one well-spoken fighter. Very interesting. Very interesting. There's a lot of Steve Kastens out there as well. So he's a jiu-jitsu instructor also. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if he has more stuff out there. Oh, wow. You did that all in real time, Beaten Track? Beaten Track in the chat said, saved screenshot of the video, did an image search on it. So you did all that in real time? That's cool, man. That was fast. Very talented people in the MINDSHOCK chat here. So, okay, does anybody know what the image on screen right now is from? What the source is here? Because, I mean, it looks so incredible. I'm just, it seems like it has to be from a movie. And in the chat, people are saying it is a test flight. K West says, not a movie, flight test. Is there any source on this video, however? I've seen the one after this, and the one after this actually looks, I mean, it looks very natural. Not that, I mean, this one could be real too. It just looks so extraordinary and possibly older than the others.
Wire.
But this one looks more
energy,
natural.
powered by the ether, existed way before.
There's also some photos. I don't think I could find it right now. I don't remember where I put it. There's a photo from the early 1900s of a boat with a motor, with an electric motor, that they were testing in a river. It kind of looks similar to this, black and white. It's black and white and really old. So, I mean, there's that, but
For big oil. We all know how dirty the oil companies are, but to think about the things we could have if they never existed.
An oil refining process was invented in 1854 by somebody in Pittsburgh. By 1870, John Rockefeller and Henry Flagler established the Standard Oil Company. And so it was like they needed to get a replacement energy source as quickly as possible. And they got it from this mining of resources.
Back in the 1800s, mainstream academia had 18 additional elements on the periodic table of elements. Ether being one of those, right? And somewhere
this Steve Kasten guy is so impressive here. I mean, this guy's crazy smart. This jiu-jitsu grappler guy is extremely smart and well-spoken. He needs to have his own podcast.
along the line, when Albert Einstein came out with his theory of relativity and started doing lectures across the country and the world, that anybody that spoke about ether at that time was completely, like, their reputation was destroyed. They lost their laboratories, they lost their teaching jobs, like what we saw in 2020.
A lot of times they'll leave the breadcrumbs. A lot of times the truth is in plain sight. So with that, Benjamin Franklin sending up the key on the kite, that's essentially you, the average American, sending up their drone with a copper wire and harvesting electricity straight from the ether.
I think that the ancients understood very well that the ether is real and that there's ways of channeling atmospheric energy.
Justin Johnson in the chat saying the theory of relativity involved marrying your cousin. Oh, wow. Wow.
Earth energy, and I think that they built their buildings with this in mind.
If we had access to free energy, I mean, imagine if you could just walk into the forest anywhere you want, and you could just put up a little device and a resonator, and you could build yourself a castle, and just do it, levitate stones, and just create a kingdom. Well, that's not very good for Joe Biden. How's he going to tax you? How's FEMA going to work with you in that situation? And how, that's why it's so dangerous to them.
That doesn't work when you're introducing an electric system that is dependent upon a power source, a bunch of wires.
Beaten Track in the chat saying, guys, as we're all on a similar path, can I recommend you all become aware of Michael Tellinger's work? He is also a flat earther, but has some good ideas on how to evolve. Yeah, I've heard Tellinger's name thrown around a bit. I believe I've seen some of his stuff. Would be interesting to do a deep dive episode on him specifically. And Beaten Track said Dr. Shiva's work as well. You're talking about Shiva Ayyadurai? I've mentioned him on a few podcasts as well.
Meters and your output that you're having to pay for, where you become dependent on a system of scarcity. This old way of doing things was based upon a system of abundance and plenty, because there's no end of the energy that's all around us all the time. There's another way of doing things. We don't have to live in this way of constant crisis because of constant scarcity. We can break through it, and I think that we're on the verge of rediscovering this knowledge at a very curious time where the old system is actually falling apart.
Everyone knew there was an ether. Most buildings were constructed in that manner until they came in and started destroying things and indoctrinating us.
You go through and you start finding these correlations, you start finding how the free energy worked, what the power stations were, how all these places have got these certain buildings and fountains and certain copper top roofings and all the stuff for landing sites, for flying machines, and you start to see that all of this stuff is way too similar all around the world for there have not to been a single culture.
Many times these towers held old world technologies, such as bells, which would send out resonant frequencies.
Boggin says, I'm assuming you're referring to Tellinger here. Before, so he did One Small Town as his project, and Boggin said before that he found those ringing stones and was into Sitchin. I'm assuming you refer to Zechariah Sitchin, the Anunnaki theory. Ancient aliens, ancient astronauts. I think he's moved away from that a bit. Yeah, maybe that's what I remember Tellinger from, because he's so familiar, the name.
He's into the community beyond. So many photos of bells being rounded up all over Europe. We're living in a time where we're waking up to what.
And regarding the bells, make sure you guys check out the Reptilian Conspiracy Deep Dive on MINDSHOCK. Part 2 is coming, and it's going to be even more mind-shocking than Part 1 on the reptilian alien shape-shifting interdimensional theory
we so recently had.
The pipe organ is a healing machine. That's why it was integral to the construction of ancient Gothic cathedrals. The organ was the centerpiece of the church, of the cathedral. Now, around the building, up, down, around, beneath, you had pipes and essentially speakers blasting this music into the cathedral.
They placed these beautiful organs under these stained glass windows, which were treated with lead and specific properties. And these, they work like car speakers. They augment the resonance and the sound out into the ether outside. So everyone outside in the community is invigorated, is on a higher state of consciousness, literally being the best they can. And you can see it in the pictures of these people in the day. Everyone is healthy.
Anyone who's been around for a full volume, live, authentic pipe organ performance will tell you your bones rattle, your organs start to respond, your hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Walk into a well-made stone cathedral, hear the pipe organ, sit there and saturate in the healing frequencies yourself. Cathedrals are something beyond just a center for worship. They are healing machines. And the pipe organ of the cathedral is just one tiny little finger of this whole realm that we're talking about.
You've got star forts, which I call a gateway.
Globe Thrusters in the chat asks, have you ever done an episode on Egypt or the pyramids? So I touched upon Egypt and Hollow Earth in the Hollow Earth deep dive episodes on MINDSHOCK. You can check those out. I talked about the pyramids in a number of different episodes. I think we touched upon them in the Altered History series. Go over a lot of Atlantis, Mudflood, Tartaria on that series. I just did a jumbo premiere on that yesterday or the other day. And we went over the pyramids to an extent, and also went over them on random other episodes. But I don't think I ever did a dedicated deep dive on the Egyptian pyramids specifically. Perhaps that's a do as well. I have spent many hours researching that. Although I would say in the past few years, I mean, ever since discovery of Fomenko's new chronology and all of this altered history, I haven't really spent that much time on the pyramids. But just if you want my opinion, with probably several hundred hours at least of research into the Egyptian pyramids, I think that there was some kind of advanced tech used to put them together. And the power station theory might have some validity, because the mainstream narrative, I mean, how often is the mainstream narrative, the official narrative of the powers that be, correct? I mean, how often is it correct? So to think that they would build these gigantic structures, of which we might only even see the top of. Again, if you check out the Hollow Earth series on MINDSHOCK, there's actually an entire underground system under the Giza Plateau. I mean, it is vast. There are some photos from it from the early 1900s expeditions. So the visible part of the pyramids might just be the very, very top. And yeah, they probably used some kind of electromagnetic technology or frequencies to move the stones. That would be my opinion. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. But I mean, I'm sure people have researched it far more than even I have, but that's kind of where I left it at.
Because the same structure exists all over the earth, have been given to.
And no, I am not claiming they're thousands of years old. I don't know when they would have done that. Possibly it could have been done just a few hundred years ago. One of my favorite topics was actually the Greek pyramids. Perhaps I'll do an episode on that. I don't think I went into... I might have gone over that on the I might have mentioned it on the Hollow Earth podcast episode regarding Egypt. But yeah, ancient Greece, supposedly ancient Greece, they had pyramids too, and they're quite interesting.
As fortifications that were built for these different wars, which made them military targets. And so they have an excuse for why it was built in whatever location. And then they have an excuse for why it was destroyed.
So in school, we learn about one fire. We learn about the Chicago Great Fire.
In the case of the Great Chicago Fire, there was a lot of fanfare over Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over the lantern.
The legend is that Mrs. O'Leary's cow in a barn kicked over a lantern, and that caused the entire fire. And poor Mrs. O'Leary and her family had their lives ruined because of this.
We only learn about Chicago. And I remember going to summer camp, and we're sitting around the campfire, and it's one dark night when we were all in bed. Bum, bum, bum. Old Miss O'Leary took a lantern to her shed, and when the cow kicked it over, she turned around and said, "There'll be a hot time in the old town tonight. Fire, fire, fire." And we would yell fire louder and louder with each verse, and we do this like 10 times to where it was echoing back to us across the lake. And now when I think about it, it's like how many kids growing up in America were singing this song about this stupid story. What I realize is that it's like an incantation, and it's spellcasting. Where did this song come from? It's a story that they wanted the population to come to embrace and believe as part of the founding mythos of the country and who we are as a people. Well, lo and behold, as an architect with the keen interest in history, I come to find out only within the last few years that there were fires in every major city. And then I come to find out that it's not just wooden shanty town built out of matchsticks. We're looking at city after city after city with photographic evidence showing masonry buildings of the most exquisite type.
Philadelphia, New York, Boston. You come down to Florida, Jacksonville, Miami. Every major city at one point was burned to the ground. Believe it or not, these were stone cities. These were megalithic stone cities, ancient metropolises that were burned down as if they were made from wood. Very quickly. Now we can speculate as to what the source of that destruction was. From above, from below, arson, biblical destruction, you name it. Nonetheless, every major city in America, if not Europe and the entire world, saw a great devastation by a fire.
You'll see pictures of people walking on the sidewalk like no big deal. I mean, that's subjective, but I mean, that's what it looks like. The pictures are strange. The sequence of events that are supposed to have taken place are strange. So, there's just a lot of clues, if you will, that these weren't random events like somebody wants us to believe.
If you look at photos of even the buildings that still exist of the old world, they always give a backstory for why they took them down, but it's just curious why so many towers are missing now. And so Pioneer Square is one of those examples. And this was built in the immediate aftermath of the fire in 1889 is curious because it appears on a real estate map from before the fire in a fully and intact form.
In order for stone to burn down, it has to reach 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. House fire reaches the temperature of 1,000 degrees. That's half. It's impossible for any stone building to be burning down. The 1800s and earlier fires may have been fake. They try to explain away multiple buildings with fire stories and multiple courthouses built on the same site in just a year with the same architect, and they're just demolishing these buildings.
This is exactly why my fireplace right here is made of brick and stone, because it doesn't melt. You got to be an idiot to think that these forest fires are going to be melting brick and stone. Use your head, guys.
As they are busy dismantling it in the 3D reality that we experience, it was part of a program to dismantle the old world and shock us into an acceptance of basically the New World Order.
Wow, that's mind-shocking, to get mind-shocked into the New World Order from the Old World Order. And like I mentioned on part one of this watch party, I'm not sold on the Old World Order being good. they might have still had masters and controllers and all of this. It's just obviously the tech and architecture were different. And they might have even inherited it from a civilization from the previous reset. So, obviously, a lot of unknowns here in the chat. People are talking about here, Justin Johnson, the castles, cathedrals, and churches were batteries, generators, and resonators. Saddlebum says cathedrals appear to be huge power stations. Yeah, and let's not forget, the entire layout of cities seems to be like an electric grid as well, like the overhead shots, the imagery. I mean, it almost looks exactly like a motherboard. I don't know who did the video on that. It might have been John Levi. He might have done a video where he actually compared not just modern cities and motherboards, but the remains of just old roads and cities in the American Southwest, I believe, in those desert areas, Arizona, Utah, Nevada. I can't find it right now, but for those that want, I mean, it almost looks like entire cities, like from above, look like electric power grids.
And that's why I wanted to speak to you today about the new world taking shape around us, about the prospects for a new world order now within our reach.
It's the new order, Babylon banging down your door. The war pigs hungry for war. We rally the troops and raise the sword.
Man, Hibbler really pulled out all the stops for this documentary. He's even got this soundtrack bumping. How many people are going to go out and get the soundtrack?
Once and for all, it's the new order. Babylon begging for your souls. They coming and they want control. Yeah, they coming. We burn their system to the floor. Once and for all. Listen, it's time to wake the fuck up.
So you had what I would call the reset of history.
And this, of course, is all fair use. Fair use. Fair use.
According to a very specific narrative. I mean, it didn't change very much. And using the media like they do today to publish it, print it, this is what happened, these are all the details, these are all the people involved, we got it down on record. So again, they're saying, okay, everything was built out of wood, like a
I just got something else. Okay, yeah, fair use from the World Fairs, fire, fear, fairies. Here's another one. For. What's it all for? For, fair, fire. For, fear, for. All of it has the same root. Fair, for, fire, fear. What's it all for? Before? And what happened before? Before the fair? There's also a forward or forward before a book. And there's also forewarned, a forewarning, a warning about the fair, fair warned, forewarned, forlorn. I mean, this root, actually, we could do a 10-hour podcast on the etymology of for, fear, fair, fire, fairy, for. I mean, this is crazy. F-O-R-E also means the front part of something, especially a ship. And now we're back to maritime terminology as well. I mean, this is the most mind-shocking word in the history of English. I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. Oh, D-Town Books has Pharaoh. 4 F-O-U-R. Pharaoh. Yeah, that's close. That's close. Wow. Yeah. Forgotten. There you go, Joyce. Forgot. You forgot about the fair? Or did you get something fair at the fair for yourself despite the fear? Oh, wow. Justin Johnson. Foresight. Yes, there's another one. Oh, man. This word, I mean, this kind of did my head in part one, but now, I mean, this is the most mind-shocking word we've ever analyzed. I mean, wow. Foreign, yes, Justin Johnson, another one. Foreshadowing, yes. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's the most versatile word I have ever seen. Fortune, yeah. Fort, oh, yeah, fort. Forte as well, your strength. Forum, yeah. Another one, forest. Okay, we gotta be done with this. Everybody's brains are gonna explode before we finish this watch party.
Hollywood movie set. Didn't hold up. It caught fire. So we came in and we built all of these beautiful structures.
Okay, I have to stop it again for forever. Yes. Forever. Forever.
To make sure they wouldn't burn down again. And that is told.
Forever forgotten. Forecast for, oh man. All right, no, we seriously gotta finish this.
Repeatedly.
You look at any major city, they suffered this same fate. And I don't think it's a simple matter of, oh, they were just so stupid. They didn't know. They put candles all over the place and let their cities keep setting on fire. The stone courthouses, the stone banks, into smithereens. Now in Jacksonville, we actually had a fire where there are first-hand accounts of people who were escaping the fire, and once they thought they had escaped to
Forefathers. Fairfathers. Forefathers. Okay, I'm done.
a safe distance, were watching the fire, because that's what people used to do back then. Wasn't much of a fire department. They just said, well, it's burning, just time to take photos and watch. And what they actually did was they were sitting up on a hill watching Jacksonville burn. They said that things on their persons started spontaneously combusting. Pocket watches, buttons, things that were made of certain materials were combusting. This was happening back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Cities would spontaneously combust with no sufficient cause, no suitable explanation. But they're in a covered carriage. What happens? Materials on their body are still spontaneously combusting, out of nowhere, sparking into flames. Now, how could that be the case if this is a local fire spreading to anything that it touches? These people were hundreds of yards away, if not more, from the fire. There weren't embers falling on them that they couldn't see, because like I said, they were already in the cab. So this is just one instance in Florida, and you can go look up your own city, the closest major city to you, and you'll find this same fate.
You look at destruction from World War I, World War II, it looks exactly the same. So these weapons have been around for a long time.
The biggest factor to 9/11 was the erasure of evidence. Erasing the evidence of the wrongdoings of the government, the financial institutions, you name it. You had evidence being destroyed. What do they call it? Jewish lightning, for lack of a better word.
Eremias Ranwolf says the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Flat Earth video would make a great watch party. Best global time I've seen. Yeah, I was going to do a point-by-point logical analysis on that one, but maybe that would be better as a watch party. Yeah.
Insurance fraud, destruction of evidence, Those two typically go hand in hand when we're talking about buildings falling down out of thin air.
Seattle burned down, the downtown. 2 months later, Ellensburg, which was at that time a major city in central Washington territory, burned down. 2 months after that, Spokane, which was another major city on the eastern flank of the territory, burned down. And when I discovered that, I just went, hold on a second. Like, there's something else entirely going on in the backstory.
It's like they want to get rid of these beautiful structures. And some are still in use, but the ones that are inconvenient to the narrative, they just want gone. And there's also probably a component of the energy grid in all of this as well, because they keep what they can use, they keep what benefits them, and at some point they determine, okay, we don't need that anymore, for whatever the reason.
Part of the story of the fires is that the fire chief wasn't in town at the time. He was away on some conference. And so the command structure was broken. So the mayor at the time in Seattle was the one that was calling shots. And he was making decisions that they should go in and make what they call fire breaks between buildings, meaning actually bringing dynamite into buildings and blowing them up. And that's acknowledged. And that's acknowledged in Boston, the Boston fire, in city after city, what's called a tactic to contain fires. And then they often say, well, look back in retrospect, maybe it wasn't the best idea. Well, what was causing these fires and what was causing this type of damage in the first place needs to be examined. So when you have a broken command structure and somebody else is calling the shots, that's really curious to me, because that's the same thing that happened in Lahaina.
The wildfires that swept through Maui are the deadliest in U.S. history in more than a century. On social media, people are speculating about what could have caused the fires. One trending theory is that the fires started due to an attack from a directed energy weapon. They're weapons like lasers that use energy fired at the speed of light to damage or destroy targets.
It's amazing how many coincidence theorist goofs think it's an impossibility that these types of weapons could be used either intentionally or as some kind of accidental test. Again, humans are fallible. But coincidence theorist bootlickers who only believe what they see on the idiot box and only on MSM channels, they just can't. I mean, the mental capacity and mental strength is not there to grasp that humans are fallible and or corrupt.
According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, many countries, including the U.S., are researching their use.
Yep, they flipped the police chief Pelletier, who was from the Vegas shooting. They made 10 emergency declarations all about Uncle Billy's and all about Banyan Drive and all this stuff.
I'm sure it's all coincidental, right?
And to believe it or not, the Sunshine Law, where they removed the Sunshine Law or suspended it, it wasn't in these 10 proclamations that they really promoted and really blew up all over the news. It wasn't in any of them. It was in this quiet little Affordable Housing Act on the side. Truly, it does look like only the places they wanted. Safeway didn't get hit. The gas stations didn't get hit. They knew what was gonna go where. It's either they did it from the top with the laser energy weapon, like others say, or it came from the bottom. But one thing was crazy is that over 24 hours later, they were still letting the fire burn. The fire was blowing so fast, the wind, it said it moved 1 mile in 10 seconds. I would think in my head could move 1 mile in 10 seconds. Some kind of boom one time, the whole place.
With the fires from Maui, I mean, I've got these rows of cars that are just completely burned.
Honestly, none of it looks like a fire.
Yeah, I mean, there's even video and images of like complete engine blocks melted. I mean, a forest fire is not gonna melt an engine block. I mean, what?
It looks like it's been destroyed with like some weapon or something from an angle. Just completely destroyed by a direct energy weapon. Just buildings sliced in half. You have melted cars, you have melted
everything. I mean, it just completely looks like a war zone.
Send a laser from a directed energy weapon against the community and then step back and say, oh, that was natural, or too bad, so sad. And all those people are left homeless and they don't get any help. And people aren't being allowed to get out of there. When it's happening, they're jumping in the water and poof, and everything looks like, cars are burned out. And people are going, whoa, what's going on here? And they're not getting any answers. And the current administration also has the slogan of Build Back Better, which was the excuse given for these other great fires. Well,
Yeah, the way Lahaina fire, the fires disappeared, like it got black holed, like one of the most significant and devastating events in United States history. It's on the news for a week or two and then gone forever. Kinda weird. Kinda weird. Also kind of like the Vegas shooting. If you haven't checked out the Vegas shooting episode, I mean, it's just kind of weird. Out of all the shootings, the deadliest gets black holed. Just gets memory holed. And all the other ones are still spoken about ad nauseum.
everything was wood. So look what we did. We built it back with this solid brick. I think what we're seeing now was never supposed to happen this quickly. I think all of these things were supposed to happen without us even being aware of it.
I can only think, why else would you want to do that? You know, it gets rid of everything. There's no fingerprints. There's nothing. It's done. There's nobody to talk. They get rid of all the buildings. What stories is there to tell?
His story is what they're going to tell. It's what they did tell us. Distorting a timeline, laced with cover-ups and preventing public awareness of our own cities being destroyed. How powerful are these weapons? And when did they truly originate?
So this frog should have turned to ash.
It even has some ashes on the bottom. It's kind of gray. And it got a little bit on the edge of some heat, but it didn't contort it or anything. It's just perfectly symmetrical, petrified. And it seems mostly hollow, but the skin is totally solid and intact.
There have been a lot of people that have been talking about the subject of meltology. And my take on that and other things is,
I wonder if they're going to go into Mud Fossil University here, because that's definitely interesting stuff.
that's part of it, it's not all of it. And what I believe is that there was a directed energy attack on the Earth's grid system that blew out the grids. And that caused swamps, deserts. It caused land to just shear off and fall into the ocean. And that would have caused melted buildings as well. A really good example on top of my head is a place called Red Rocks State Park in California. It looks melted. And there's other examples as well. So my belief is that there was just some massive surge of energy. So that surge of energy could have been from multiple sources and just went through the grid system and just blew everything out. When they came here, this was a destroyed and ruined landscape. And they even used the word ruins to describe things, but they pushed things far back in the past.
And for those that don't know, Mud Fossil University on YouTube covers, even DNA testing on so-called stone, whether statues or petrified stone of some kind, and it comes back as human DNA. Really weird stuff. I went over it a little bit on the Altered History series. Fascinating stuff.
Thousands of years or millions of years. And, that was so far back, we don't know anything about that. The Earth was terraformed by a highly advanced civilization. And so things we think of as mountains, like the Rocky Mountains and hills, are actually buildings.
Wow, I mean, Hibbler really outdid himself here. I mean, this is a very well-made documentary and included some points and clips I haven't seen before. I actually haven't seen this particular theory that certain mountains were former buildings. Other than the Grand Canyon, the Egyptian temples with the Egyptian names, but as far as them being actual buildings, this is interesting stuff.
When you look at the city of San Francisco in the early 1870s, and not a soul around, vast emptiness with a fully intact city, and nothing's out of place except that there's no people. And so what it looks like to me is they went into a city that was already there.
Empty. Nobody around. So odd. Wait, wouldn't the Tower of Jewels be visible somewhere on this map? Remember, from the World's Fair in San Francisco? It shouldn't be, because that was 37 years after this photograph was snapped. Oh, yes, of course. It looks like it's already there.
You gotta love the receipts that are brought. The receipts. Because all the coincidence theorist goofs and authority worshipping cultist bootlickers, all they can really do is ignore the receipts.
With the World Fairs, it does seem that the purpose of them was to provide us with a new narrative and bring the population to them, just overwhelm them with this fantastical realm that they were now going to internalize and then burn it down in almost like a ritualistic fashion to sear this into the consciousness of the people.
The populating of the Americas was not as authentic, organic as people might have been led to believe. There was a large system of what people have termed orphan trains, incubator baby farms. A lot of these were housed, hubbed.
The only thing really disappointing about this documentary is that it's not 20 hours long, where they actually do a deep dive into all of it, because it's so fascinating. All of these subtopics are so fascinating. And I mean, obviously, they're making a single feature length documentary, but it would be cool if it was, MINDSHOCK style with 20 plus hours, just so they can really expand on all this. But hopefully he'll make follow-up documentaries on each of these subtopics, because very, very fascinating stuff.
In World's Fairs, you had incubator babies at the World's Fairs. Buy an Asian baby, buy a Filipino, buy an African baby.
I think part of it was repopulation. I think part of it was early child trafficking. Premature children were in these incubators. You see pictures of these, nurses in their uniforms in a room filled with baby incubators, with people paying admission. With our increased awareness today, we've got things like Planned Parenthood and other things going on.
This also reminds me of the Mind Unveiled extensive videos on like the Cabbage Patch Kids babies and all of that. I think we're going to have to do some watch parties on Mind Unveiled as well. Yeah, Hibbler definitely needs to do Old World Order 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on these, yeah.
There are companies that mail kids. There's a bit on my business where somebody can place an order for a child based on eye color or whatnot, and they get delivered. That's not good. And I think it's the same idea, that there's this harvesting of humans going on without our knowledge and awareness, and unspeakable things happening to children that got its start very early on because the same families are behind it.
And you would see this mass migration of orphan trains and orphan boats, and you're like, first of all, where are all these fucking orphans coming from? How many orphans were there in the 1800s? Why?
So everybody's learning this thing at this young age, and everybody has to go by these new set of structures and new set of rules. They have to learn this new history that everybody isn't really agreeing with, and then anybody that's not agreeing with, they have to go to the insane asylum. There is the orphan asylums for the children, and the insane asylums for the adults. Now all of a sudden, John D. Rockefeller comes out with a board of education, and all of the children are sent to a public schooling system.
Okay, he's getting into the indoctrination facilities known as schooling. Okay. So, I mean, even throughout all of history, even in so-called pop culture and pop literature, you have Oliver Twist, you know, one of the most famous orphan tales of all time. What is the twist? Is it the twist of history? Is history being twisted regarding everything to do with orphans and repopulation? But it does seem like a lot of these topics do overlap. So, I mean, that's what's one of the things that is so creepy about this. And I really do like this documentary just because so much is touched upon. Again, it would have been actually kind of cool to have a 20-hour documentary where it's not just touched upon, but, you know, comprehensive deep dives. But it does seem like a lot of these things really are related.
To learn their new history. What better way to trick a society than to take their children at a young age and teach them exactly what you want them to know?
If people just realize that if you don't understand the past, you'll repeat it over and over again. And it prevents people from going to progress in the future. And us as a collective species, we have to get to the nitty-gritty of what really happened, what our true potential now is as a collective civilization.
What is this clip from right here? Is this from a World Fair? I mean, how creepy is this clip? If you didn't know, it could be from a movie about ancient Greece, right?
And us as a collective
Like, let's watch this
species,
clip right here.
we have to get to the nitty-gritty of.
Like, is this at a World Fair? I mean, look at those columns. Are those single-piece stone columns? And is this from a movie, or is this from a World Fair in the 1900s? Is this from a 1900s World Fair that looks indistinguishable from ancient Greece?
Our true now is as a collective civilization. Because we don't rely on those people anymore.
What the heck is this? Ritualistic ceremony? This looks quite disturbing. It looks similar to what they do at CERN and even at the UN, right? There was some kind of weird ceremony at the UN. And also quite similar to even biblical painting depictions.
How does any of us know? And I would ask my father this all the time. I would say, Dad, How do you know you have a great, 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 great grandpa? How do you know? None of us know. It's the truth, you know. Those are things, and you know, people can sit there and say, you guys are off your rockers talking about this stuff, but I mean, look who we're accepting the official story from. All I've ever known my whole life is that we don't know how we got here, and we don't know why, we don't know when. If Americans are sitting there one day and say, I don't know how I got here, I don't know why.
I had no idea that BJ Penn was this free thinker, was this logical free thinker. I did not know this. I did not know this.
And I don't know when, well then you've been reset.
He needs to go on Jackson's podcast, Rampage Jackson. He's a flat earther. He talks flat earth sometimes. Him and BJ Penn, if BJ Penn hasn't been on the Jackson podcast, that would make an awesome episode.
Don't believe what we say. Go out in your own communities and do your own research. There's plenty of buildings that they left for us to examine. Once we can all wake up collectively, then we can come to realize what they have truly done to us.
Why does everybody think that they didn't destroy all the buildings? Was it because it was just too hard or too much hassle? I mean, look at the hassle they already did go through. I mean, just through the world wars and the direct energy weapon, all this and all the fires. I mean, they clearly went through a lot of hassle. Was it truly impossible to simply remove every single building? Or is this all part of some kind of Illuminati rule set where there has to be, there just has to be some kind of revelation of the method appealing to the subconscious of those they exploit, where they can't exploit human souls without their permission, and the permission, it could be subconscious. Is that why they didn't choose to destroy each and every building? Oh, Breek says the buildings still have use. Or yes, or there's some kind of use we don't know about, which is why they haven't destroyed all of them.
Shout out Hibbler Productions. Check this old world order stuff out. Here you go. A true gem. Firm Fam 2024.
Sift through the lies of indoctrination. Ancient civilization laid to wasting. More I scratch at the surface, more I'm facing. Hidden no world, advanced not cavemen. Free energy before the lives of the Masons. Flip the script and change the whole situation. Americans now not created. The tech of the colossal creation. What lies had they hid from?
Yeah, there he is, Steve Kasten. And that's his Instagram there, Holistic Jiu-Jitsu. A Star is Born. I would definitely watch a lot of content with Steve Kasten on all of this subject matter. Elaine in the chat says they have that karma rule about telling us, so leaving some buildings would check that box. Justin Johnson says they justify to themselves that they left the truth in our faces, so when they answer to the Almighty.
Us in plain sight, the power of the ethos to feed them free light. Structures weren't built by horse and buggies. Huge slabs of stone, masterful, not ugly. Old photos, show marvels that's been there. Miles from quarries, not anywhere near there. Research the old world right now, I declare we taking back our world from those who feed fear. Yo, it's that old world order, the new world slaughter. Don't drink the water, raise sons and daughters. Teach them the truth, blessed from the Father. And rip the chains right off us. Yo, it's that old world order, the new world slaughter. Don't drink the water, raise sons and daughters. Teach them the truth, blessed from the Father. And rip the chains right off us. This is the age of Tartaria, massive mud floods and real history, not the chronicles and where the Tesla get his coil. Sustained energy, not the rock of oil.
That's a catchy tune. Some interesting lyrics there. But yeah, this documentary was so much more impressive and professional than I thought it would be. I mean, because I remember Hibbler on some flat earth debates, and he just didn't seem all that professional. But this documentary is just really well made, a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like at least semi-amateurish, but it was quite professional. Could it literally air on the History Channel? And yeah, so definitely a very impressive documentary. Would definitely watch a part, however many parts he makes of this, because very interesting stuff and some new pieces of info there. Definitely some new pieces of info. Any final points here before we close out this part 2 of the first watch party in MindShock history? Plenty more to come. I mean, this was kind of fun, and I think everybody enjoyed it, so we'll be doing more of these, and it's a little bit less intensive and mentally exhaustive than exact point-by-point logical analyses where every single fallacy is counted. But there's room for everything on MindShock. So, yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. I believe next on the schedule will be the analysis, the preliminary analysis, so I won't have utilizing the system is really difficult. I'm trying to actually implement AI, so it would be a lot easier. But we'll do more of an analysis-based watch party of the Alex Jones, Eddie Bravo, Flat Earth Dave debate on InfoWars from recently. I believe that's next on the schedule. So I'll see if I can do that either I could probably do that Tuesday night. So I might not be able to get to that tomorrow, but we have that Tuesday night, and then we have to finish Witsit and Soy Lodge. We'll be getting to that within a day or two as well of the Alex Jones breakdown. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. If you want to help support the MindShock podcast, help logic and reason return to a world where it's quickly going extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. If you're not getting the notifications, like and comment on more videos. That's how the YouTube algos work. And if it still doesn't work, you can just go to youtube.com/MindShock. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.